And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominick, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, does my homeowner's insurance cover losses if my cat happens to claw out the eyes of an unwanted guest? And will Colin Powell's tragic death set back COVID vaccination numbers and also puberty? And now, the podcast host who could give you a comedy warm-up act you won't forget as long as you're there for it, Pete Dominick.
That's right, Pete Co. Thank you very much for another bizarre and hilarious introduction to this daily podcast. And speaking of being there for it, tonight in New York City at City Winery, I'll be hosting a fundraiser for Why Hunger. Go to whyhunger.org. Super impressive organization run by amazing anti-poverty heroes. Whyhunger.org to donate to them. Hi. How are you? How are you doing? How was your yesterday? How's it going so far today for you? Appreciate you joining me. I have two awesome guests on today's podcast, Cauvin and Barry Ritholtz. Both join me for about an hour each. That's coming up. I got the news coming up, and yesterday I asked during the show opening what you thought of the news format, and I was talking to some listeners who I met last week when I was with the Florida Teachers Association in Orlando about the news, and oh my gosh, I asked for feedback, and did I get feedback? Got like 20 emails from listeners, so much great feedback on the news, and just to read a little bit of it here at the opening, Katie Knapp said, "Please keep the news dump. It's honestly how I get most of my news. Since you asked this morning, I listened to the whole podcast, start to finish. Love the format just the way it is. Have a great day." You have a great day, Katie Knapp, because I know that you're listening and you're an awesome person. And guess who else emailed me? ABC News, Intelligence Squared moderator and host of that podcast, John Donvan, listens to the show. He's a subscriber, always giving me great feedback, and a great friend. He said, "Pete, you do a really good Bernie Sanders impression." Thank you, John. And he says, "On your market research question, the news is my favorite part of the podcast. I'm always there for those, whether I get to the interviews or not." Thank you, John. Thank you to Troy, who emailed me and said, "Listen to your show daily before any other podcast. I love the format. Last 24 news dump conversations. My vote. Don't change it at all. Often I pick up on something from the last 24 and the news dump that I didn't catch on one of my social media news feeds, Google News or Facebook." And then he went on to talk about the guests, but I mostly was asking about the show opening, the news. The great Kim Nyborg in Iowa responded. "I just started listening to today's show. Heard your request for feedback. I listen at 8:30 every morning." Well, hello, Kim, at 8:30. 10:30 East. Where are you? Central, Iowa? I don't know. She says, "I listen to you as you post it, to the shows you post it. I don't skip around because I think the format you put in is great." So thank you, Kim. She went on to say, "Sometimes I think, oh, that guest isn't going to be one I'm interested in. Maybe I'll skip that one. But then you suck me in every time. I don't know if I ever skipped an interview, honestly." And a lot of people say that. I wasn't sure if I was going to like that guest, but somehow you convinced me. And that's the highest compliment. Ashley says, "I love the news segment. It's the only consistent way I hear the news. Appreciate all the hard work." Mary Beth and Jack and Dom and so many more that I didn't even get to respond to. Tried to respond to most of them, but thank you all for your feedback. I don't want to read it all, but it was super helpful. I'm going to put up some polling questions for listeners and subscribers to answer as well. And we'll just keep on making this daily podcast better and better with video and other virtual hangouts. And hopefully I still do want to figure out a way to get to a live daily show, but I think I'm still a ways from that because I'm going to need help. And that's why I need you to subscribe right now. Go to standupwithpete.com or just go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick. And you can subscribe there. Also, today's show is sponsored by Quip, the electric toothbrush. Very excited about having them as a sponsor. I'll do that ad later on, but definitely go to getquip.com/standup right now. Getquip.com/standup. I'll do it coming up after the news. Let's do that now. But thank you very much for all of your feedback, for listening, for subscribing. And I'm very excited to meet more of you, talk to more of you, and be joined by more of you on our virtual hangouts Thursdays at 8. Again, this week, I'm going to have to reschedule. I'm definitely going to do it this week. So maybe Wednesday night or maybe Friday night. But I want to do the hangout desperately, but I've got to do the board meeting, Board of Education on Thursday night, where I got to go and speak on behalf of our inclusion and diversity group to make sure these folks that are terrified about what their kids are learning in school and their feelings, what they're going to do when they find out about history of this country. Yeah, I got to go out and speak out against that, and I know that you support me doing that on this Thursday. But stay tuned. If you're a subscriber, you will get an email. You should be getting an email every day about the show and all of the information. But now it's time to get that news segment I was telling you. All right, let's hit it. Last 24. All right, lots to talk about in the news today. Of course, yesterday, Colin Powell passed away. Kickoff of Teachers Week, Teacher Appreciation Week, and we heard from Dr. Jill Biden, of course, teacher, Joe Biden, the president. Got a few clips for you from the White House briefing yesterday. Congressional negotiations are continuing and much more. But let's start with the Late Show. Stephen Colbert on CBS. He had the chairman of the Intel Committee. Is it the committee's the chairman of? Adam Schiff on, and they were talking about, Adam Schiff has a new book. They were talking about the investigation into January 6th into Trump. And of course, we heard from Christopher Steele this week on 60 Minutes, who he said he thinks the P-tape exists. And here's Colbert's theory that he told Adam Schiff on The Late Show last night.
By the way, do you think there is a PP tape?
I take no position on the PP tape.
You take no position?
No.
I've actually been there. I've been to that hotel room in Moscow.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, I did an investigative report. CBS, Long Green Network, we went there, right? I jumped up and down on that bed. We tried to recreate the evening and everything. I'm not joking. We heard from an oligarch over there said, they've got it all wrong. He was at a party that was being held in that room. And he sat there and watched it happen. He, suggested it, but he didn't hire them. The prostitutes were just there at this party that he went to. That makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Doesn't that have the ring of truth? Take no position, but if you think I'm right, just breathe and blink.
Okay. He did a big blink and held his breath there, Adam Schiff there. So make whatever of that, yeah, you want to. Okay, so the former Joint Chiefs, former general, of course, former Secretary of State, people always thought he would run for president. Colin Powell passed away at the age of 84 yesterday. He had multiple myeloma, though a lot of people didn't know that in the morning. The morning we found out that Colin Powell died, I think that was shocking for most people, didn't realize how ill he was, but his family had posted a statement and they said that he died of complications due to COVID and that he was fully vaccinated. Well, people went to social media and made whatever they wanted of that. And unfortunately, my old friend, not anymore, but Will Cain was on Fox and Friends in the morning and then again at night. Unfortunately, he's getting a lot of time to talk on television. And he used it to seed doubt that, that the vaccine isn't that effective and therefore mandates shouldn't be in place. And it's just super sad to see him say these things. But here he is on Fox and Friends in the morning. I mean, by the way, of course, ridiculous to even be talking about COVID. We should be talking about Colin Powell. I didn't have a lot of nice things to say about him, but the idea that you're going quick to make the COVID point, the vaccine point, is so bad. But yeah, nonetheless, here he is, the bottom of the barrel, Will Cain.
You brought up COVID. Look, this day will be a day for many things, for remembering the man, for remembering the leader that was lost. It's also a day to understand the implication on everyday Americans. And the reports are he died from complications of COVID. The family has made a point in their post on Facebook this morning that Colin Powell was fully vaccinated. And as Americans out there wonder what lies ahead for them, and they search and they need truth moving forward. We're seeing data from across the world. We're seeing data from Europe, from the United Kingdom, that fully vaccinated people are being hospitalized and fully vaccinated people are dying from COVID. And here we have a very high-profile example that is going to require more truth from our government, from our health leaders as well, as we talk about this story on a day when state after state and institution after institution are pushing mandates for vaccination.
In this time of divided, the country's very divided. One thing people are pretty clear, you're going to get both sides of the aisle weighing in just as strongly with Colin Powell, because I think it was pretty hard not to have great respect to the person he was and what he's achieved.
His parents were immigrants from Jamaica.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Ridiculous. That's what she says. Oh, come on. Fox News host Will Cain using the death of Colin Powell to rant against vaccines, trying to politicize his death by claiming the fact that he was fully vaccinated is an argument against vaccine mandates. Of course, he had a form of cancer that weakens the immune system. It killed my Uncle John, and it's horrible. And a lot of people know about multiple myeloma. But that was just, him saying we need truth, we need data. We have all the truth. We have all the data that we have right now, and all of it says that getting vaccinated is the very best thing that you can do. Just really terrible. And here is Zeke Emanuel. He's a doctor, a prominent doctor, and here he is with the fact check on that.
Colin Powell had three important risk factors for COVID. One is his age, 84. He's at the very high end, and we know those people are much more vulnerable. Second, as you point out, he had cancer. And third, he's a man, and men are at much higher risk of dying, especially in his age category. 58% of deaths in those people 65 to 84 are male, even though they make up a minority of that age group. When it comes to multiple myeloma, it's a cancer of the cells, the B cells in the immune system that produce antibodies, so they don't produce effective antibodies, and they grow and grow. And when you treat someone for multiple myeloma, it does suppress the immune system, so he was immunocompromised.
All right, Zeke Emanuel, giving the data, the actual needed data. Now let's go to MSNBC. Chris Hayes with Mehdi Hassan talking about just how pernicious and evil and awful and insidious Fox News is with that move yesterday. There was more people saying similar things as well over there on Fox.
Also, his death is a reminder that there are people who are vulnerable, even with vaccination, that there are immunocompromised people, and that actually, like, this project that we are engaged in, which we've not done a great job collectively as a people, is a collective project for all of us to do our part to keep people safe, particularly those individuals who are immunocompromised, and there are millions of them, and other people who face elevated risk from this. And to turn around and take, oh, well, he died and he was vaccinated as this kind of, oh, this raises questions is really kind of awful in a particular way.
It's so horrific and so irresponsible for that to happen so quickly this morning. And by the way, as you pointed out, Chris, it came from the straight news side. It didn't come from Tucker Carlson's Twitter account. It came from the so-called Fox News straight news. It's horrific. What Fox News has done to encourage anti-vaxxer sentiment in recent months in particular is one of the most reckless decisions by a media organization in my lifetime.
Well, Dr. Jill Biden and Joe Biden got caught walking through a Washington, D.C. restaurant without their masks on. You're supposed to have the mask on when you're walking through the restaurant, and they got nailed. Someone took pictures, and Pete Ducey, speaking of Fox News at the White House briefing, he was not going to let that scandal go.
A mask requirement inside D.C. restaurants, yet President Biden and the First Lady were not wearing masks while walking around a D.C. restaurant on Saturday. Why?
Well, I think what we were referring to is a photo of them walking out of a restaurant after they had eaten, masks in hand, where they had not yet put them back on yet. So I would say, of course, there are moments when we all don't put masks back on as quickly as we should. But I don't think we should lose the forest through the trees here. And that our objective here is to get more people vaccinated, make sure that that schools and companies around the country can put in place requirements to save more lives and keep people safer, and not overly focus on moments in time that don't reflect overarching policy.
Not just exiting the restaurant, though. He was walking through the restaurant with no mask on. There is a carve out for people under 2 or people who are actively eating or drinking. So I'm just curious why the president was doing this.
I think I just addressed it.
All right, you're not going to get any more from her on that one, Ducey. What do you think? Is that? I mean, he should have worn his mask. It just looks bad. But are we upset about that? Anyone? I like this, by the way. This tweet from J.L. Cauvin, who's on the show today. And I was going through all of his tweets, and I think he nails it with this. Donald Trump is an arsonist. Joe Biden is a firefighter. Being mad that Joe Biden isn't putting out the fire fast enough is a fair critique. Wanting to put Trump and his minions back in charge is suicidal stupidity. So thought that was a great tweet. Anyway, let's go back to the briefing where Steve Ducey, Peter Ducey, whatever his name is, he's a Ducey, the nepotistic hire that he is. He did ask this is a fair question where, I think it speaks for itself. What do you think?
Okay. Why did the president break his promise not to enter into any decisions about what cases the Justice Department should bring and not bring?
How did he break his promise?
Well, he was asked if the DOJ should prosecute people who defied January 6th committee subpoenas, and he did not say, I will let the Justice Department decide. He said yes.
Well, let me reiterate, and I put out a statement also on Friday night on this, where I conveyed clearly that, one, the president continues to believe that January 6th was one of the darkest days in our democracy. He also continues to believe that the Department of Justice has the purview and the independence to make decisions about prosecutions. And that continues to be his view, and that continues to be how he will govern.
You say that is his view, but that is not what he said.
I just conveyed what his view is, and that is also how he has operated, how he has governed, and how he will continue to govern. And I think that's what's important for people to watch.
So then what's changed since last year when he said, I will not do what this former President Trump does and use the Justice Department as my vehicle to insist that something happened?
Well, since you give me the opportunity here, former President Trump used his office to incite an insurrection. He put political pressure on senior DOJ officials to propagate lies about the election to the point where they threatened to resign en masse. I think there's hardly a comparison there.
But President Biden said, the Justice Department in my administration will be totally independent of me. And he said he would not enter into any decisions about what cases the agency would bring and not bring. How is that not exactly
And he has not, and he will not. And criminal prosecutions are their sole purview. Criminal prosecutions are the sole purview of the Department of Justice. That is the president's position. That is what he nominated the Attorney General to operate under. That is exactly what the Attorney General is doing. And those are the actions that people can watch from this administration.
Yeah, you're not supposed to influence the Department of Justice if you're the president. And he answered a question saying that he thinks one way or another what the Department of Justice should do, and he's not supposed to do that. So, I don't know. What do you think? The bar is so low at this point. I mean, Trump wasn't answering questions. He was writing tweets threatening the Department of Justice, firing everybody all the time. And it was a completely different fire starter, like we said earlier. Anyway, Joe Biden surprised his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, who is honoring the National Teachers of the Year out at the White House yesterday. They hosted a ceremony recognizing the 2021 and 2020 National Teachers of the Year, the state teacher finalists for those years, and teachers nationwide. And the president, a surprise guest, walks out to the South Lawn after the First Lady, the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona. Both teachers had spoken at the ceremony. And here's just a quick snippet of what President Biden said.
You know, when you think about it, the single most consequential people in the world beyond our parents, God willing, if we have them, is our teachers. You are the ones who, you're the kite strings that lift our national ambitions aloft. I mean, not a joke. It's a reality. It's a reality. One of the reasons why we're working so hard and the Secretary is helping so much in the Build Back Better plan is that the rest of the world is starting to figure this out. The rest of the world is starting to out-educate us. Early education is earlier and more prevalent in European countries. A significant number we rank number 34 out of 37 industrial nations in the world, and the number of where we rank in terms of people getting a degree beyond high school And so we have to get back in step. And you're all the reasons. You're the best of the best.
Yep. And the best thing that we can do is universal pre-K. The outcomes are, the data on the outcomes is so conclusive. And yet parents can't afford it. And it's not part of the public education system. We've got to get it done if we want to be able to compete with the rest of the world, which does it. And also gives parents paid leave and time off. All right. Well, finally, I want to read something about that I like from Spencer Ackerman about Colin Powell, but I want to play a new ad, an attack ad of sorts. Don Winslow Films, the author, out with another attack ad. This one, hashtag Joe Manchin, Senator for Sale. All these videos go viral, already up to almost 1 million views, and he just put it out a couple of hours ago. So by the time you're listening to it, probably a lot more. He starts by talking about how much money Joe Manchin's daughter has made, but this is a pretty powerful 2 minutes. The images help a lot, but I think the audio does a pretty good job too. And a powerful negative ad against Joe Manchin from Don Winslow Films.
What was your salary last year?
About $18 million.
It pays to be a member of Joe Manchin's family.
Follow the money.
Joe Manchin has represented West Virginia for 40 years. Delegate, state senator, secretary of state, governor, U.S. senator. 40 years, and West Virginia is still the second poorest state in the country. Economy. West Virginia ranks 48 out of 50 states.
Thank you, Joe Manchin.
Healthcare, 47 out of 50 states.
Thank you, Joe Manchin.
Education, 45 out of 50 states.
Thank you, Joe Manchin.
Infrastructure, wait for it, 50 out of 50 states. Manchin has an estimated net worth of $8 million,
Follow the money.
while the average annual income of West Virginia is just $26,000. Manchin receives a taxpayer-paid salary as a U.S. Senator of $184,500. So he didn't get his $8 million there.
Nice, yeah, Joe.
So where does all the money come from? Manchin receives $491,000 annually from his son's coal brokerage company, EnerSystems. His wife, Gail Manchin, receives $613,000 from EnerSystems. That's $1.1 million to Manchin and his wife from his family's energy company. Manchin makes 5 times more from his family's energy company than he does as a U.S. Senator. Joe Manchin has blocked President Biden's infrastructure plan from moving forward because he wants to kill legislation to replace coal-fired plants with clean energy. Manchin is selling out his own country to protect big coal and big oil who own him.
Joe Manchin, I talk to his office every week. He is the kingmaker, and he's not shy about sort of staking his claim early.
The chairman of the committee that regulates coal shouldn't be a part owner of a coal company.
This is Heather Manchin, Joe Manchin's daughter. After lying about having an MBA, she was named CEO of Myeloma Industries. She artificially jacked up the price of EpiPens by 461%. and was awarded with a 671% salary increase. West Virginia is poor, poorly educated, and broken, but Joe Manchin and his entire family have become multimillionaires.
West Virginia, abused and suckered for 40 years by Joe Manchin.
Well, there you go. Don Winslow Films' new attack ad against Joe Manchin. But what's it going to do? What is that? What is that going to do? That, I guess I don't really get that. They're gonna primary him? That's not going to happen. Are we just going to get a more extreme Republican? I don't know. How bad do you want to hurt Joe Manchin? Because I just don't think that's going to win his vote. But it is a pretty shitty ad, pretty powerful ad. And I'm sure you can find a lot more politicians that have made a lot of money through the power that they've gained. But it's not. I don't think it's even most. I don't know. I just hate that cynicism that all these guys are there getting rich. It's just not the case. But all right. Well, finally, I want to just read something to you here before I get to the news dump, all the rest of the headlines, rapid fire. This is from Spencer Ackerman's Forever Wars newsletter about Colin Powell, who he says is the only man who could have stopped the Iraq war, and now he's dead. Colin Powell chose to sell a war he knew was wrong. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis were unavailable for comment on his death. That's the petty subtitle. And this is just a great piece with a lot of context. I'm not doing it justice. But after Bush's re-election, Spencer Ackerman writes, a former ambassador recalled Powell's reaction after learning he would not be staying on for a second term. They had lied to him. All the crap about the so-called biological vans, Cheney and the neocons pushing on the CIA, the ex-ambassador told author Robert Draper he was furious that he'd been made a patsy. But Spencer Ackerman writes, Colin Powell had made himself a patsy. He knew that what was about to unfold was wrong. Disastrously confused complicity with resistance in a disastrous manner and facilitated the end of an estimated 300,000 human beings. Colin Powell, at the apex of his influence, destroyed what had been his career's central purpose, preventing a repetition of Vietnam. Pretty harsh words from Spencer Ackerman on the day of Colin Powell's death, but what more will he be remembered for? You might say the full context of the man's career should be what he's judged for. I'm not sure if history remembers the full context of anybody's life, but Colin Powell had some other stains on his career as well. And a lot of people might say, well, he was the first African-American to do blank. That's true. But I guess the way I see it is that, yeah, and through all that, he sent a whole lot of black and brown Americans into the Iraq War and broke a lot of promises and a lot of families on the way out, and still are. Colin Powell was 84 years old, and I would love to hear your thoughts on him and death in general in terms of how we should be remembering people and how we should be talking about them and taking a measure of them. Okay, well, that is the last 24, and now it's time for the news dump, ladies and gentlemen. But before that, I want to tell you about the Quip electric toothbrush, because do you have one? Apparently, the Quip electric toothbrush is loved by over 7 million mouths. I mean, I've told you that I have some nasty oral hygiene. I mean, I brush before I go to bed and again in the morning, and I floss a couple times a week, but I'm not that consistent, which is why the Quip electric toothbrush is going to be great for me. Apparently, a lot of people also brush too hard, and some electric toothbrushes are too abrasive, but the Quip toothbrush has sensitive sonic vibrations for an effective clean. It's gentle on your sensitive gums, and mine definitely are. Also, the Quip, it's small. It declutters your sink and cabinet, makes traveling with an electric toothbrush even easier. There's no wires or a clunky charger. It runs for 3 months on a single charge, folks. And did you know that up to 90% of us don't brush for a full 2 minutes or don't even clean evenly? That's definitely me. And Quip electric toothbrush has a built-in 2-minute timer, and it pulses every 30 seconds to remind you when to switch sides and help you clean your whole mouth evenly. Did I mention on one charge you get 3 months usage? Is that real? Also, kids can use this. There's a special kids electric toothbrush. Kids need a kid-friendly features and the guidance of 2-minute timer with 30-second pulses. These are not gimmicks. It helps them build good oral care habits for life. I wish I had the Quip electric toothbrush when I was a child, because then my teeth wouldn't be so messed up. I mean, they're not, because I've had a lot of work done. But they're probably nasty in there. I'm sorry. But that's why I'm excited to use their anti-cavity toothpaste. Anti-activity? Their anti-cavity toothpaste. They got mint and watermelon. They also have refillable floss string, which has a eco-friendly dispenser that you keep for life. I like that. I'm all about sustainability, which is why I'm all about Quip electric toothbrush. The smart electric toothbrushes for adults and kids. New Bluetooth smart motor connects the free Quip app so you can track your brushing. We're tracking our brushing now. Somebody's got to, because it's not working for me. You get tips and coaching. You get rewards for good habits. This is great for your kids. And let's just be honest, a healthy mouth is its own reward. But free gifts like refill discounts and products also motivate people to consistently brush better. You got to have better oral health, better hygiene. That's why you need Quip. Go to getquip.com/standup right now. You'll get your first refill free. That's your first refill at getquip.com/standup. Spelled GETQUIP.com/standup. Quip, the good habits company. All right, come on, go get your toothbrush and support the podcast at the same time. Coming up, comedian, podcaster, lawyer, the great J.L. Cauvin. Before that, I got Barry Ritholtz. And before that, right now, I got your news dump. Hit it, Pete.
Palm Springs condo, gentle breeze, residents in a huff. There's a cougar plotting their death on today's news dump.
Oh, God. That's terrible. I hope everybody's okay at that condo complex. Cougar sounded pissed off. All right, let's see. What do we have for you in tonight's news dump? Let's see here. One of the largest operators of TV stations in the U.S. is dealing with disruptions caused by ransomware attacks. Sinclair Broadcast Group announced Monday that it was hit over the weekend. The company said hackers stole data and encrypted some operational servers. Well, Sinclair Broadcast Group is pretty bad, aren't they? So, not that I'm rooting for anybody to get hacked or ransomed, taken hostage, but... And speaking of hacker news, a Turkish hacker apparently hit the Donald Trump website. The action section of Donald Trump's website carried an unusual message in English and Turkish on Monday, which read, "Do not be like those who forget Allah." So Allah made them forget themselves. Here, they really went astray. Well, the page has been defaced by Turkish activist group, and it links to its Facebook and Instagram pages, according to Newsweek. A nationalist video of Turkish President Erdogan was also embedded. The site was back to normal Monday morning, stealing its supporters' money. Right-wing media personality Dennis Prager offered dangerous advice to his audience about achieving natural immunity from COVID. It can, of course, kill a person in the process. He also tried to hug thousands of people to get COVID. And now guess what? Dennis Prager has announced he has COVID. Prager, an outspoken Trump supporter, after at first being critical of the ex-president, said he tested positive last week, which is why he didn't do his show last week, and told his audience that he tried his damnedest to become infected with COVID by hugging strangers in the thousands, literally in the thousands, while not being inoculated. And he finally got it. And then he apparently is quoted as saying, "I certainly don't gamble with my health, but I do believe in science and the science of ivermectin, not the lies of the New York Times." Well, doctors and researchers are recommending people do exactly the opposite of everything that Dennis Prager has been pushing. And so thoughts and prayers to Dennis Prager. Also, Don Bongino is another right-wing. This guy's a real asshole. I've gotten into it with him a few times on social media. And he is now threatening to quit the influential radio network that he is platformed on, Westwood One, because they've got a vaccine mandate. Several of the radio hosts at Cumulus have already quit or been terminated because of a stated preference to not be vaccinated for personal or medical reasons. And now Bongino is threatening to join them, though his own team says that he has been vaccinated on the advice of his doctors because he has Hodgkin's lymphoma. But Bongino is objecting to a mandate on behalf of rank-and-file employees who don't want to get vaccinated. All right, well, you literally could die on the hill of not wanting his colleagues to do what he did, which is the healthy thing, and get vaccinated. So maybe he will, or they will. Awful. What a great thought leader Dan Bongino seems to be. All right, few more headlines for you. D.C. has suspended most of its metro trains over safety. The Ford Foundation is divesting from fossil fuels. That's a huge story every time a big organization or company does that. Massive news, very important, the divestment movement. Get on board. And international police sting has seized $232 million of cocaine. How about that? On a yacht in the Atlantic Ocean. Portuguese police said the shipment was one of the largest hauls in Europe in recent years and the biggest in Portugal for 15 years. Police suspect the cocaine belonged to an international drug trafficking gang that was bringing cocaine into Europe through the Iberian Peninsula. And about a quarter of the rest of it was headed to former Trump administration and CNBC's Larry Kudlow's house. Just kid, Larry Kudlow. He's great. He loves cocaine. Or he did. Anyway, the number 89% was trending on social media on Twitter last night. And so I went down that rabbit hole. And the reason was that apparently individual stock ownership is more concentrated than ever before. I learned about this before I talked with Barry Ritholtz. It would have been a great conversation topic for him. But according to the Federal Reserve, the wealthiest 10% of households own 89% of U.S. stocks. The wealthiest 10% own 89% of U.S. stocks. The stocks differential reflected the growing wealth inequity. We're seeing all kinds of metrics about how much the rich got richer and the wealth gap grew during the pandemic, with 1% of Americans holding 32% of all wealth. Also a record. The top 1% own a lot of stock. The rest of us own very little. The pandemic, the 1% added more than $6.5 trillion in corporate equities and multiple fund wealth, while the bottom 90% picked up 6.5 versus 1.2 trillion. Lots more in that report, and that is all I've got for you. Probably a good place to end the news dump today. Now it's time to get to my first guest. Just mentioned him. He, of course, is the president of Ritholtz Wealth Management, the author of Bailout Nation. He's also the host of the Masters in Business podcast, and he's got a very popular blog. Yeah, blogs are still a thing, and his is one of the biggest blogs in all of finance. It's called The Big Picture by Barry Ritholtz, and massive following on Twitter as well, at Ritholtz, where he's always great. He's one of my closer friends, as well as a great guest here on the show, and I'm always happy to have him joining me. Lots of ground covered. We probably spent too much time talking politics. We didn't quite agree. Ritholtz gets pretty impatient when it comes to analyzing politics. I don't blame him, but we got to a lot of good stuff in the latter half of this interview, for sure, I'd say. And then coming up, J.L. Cauvin as well. But right now, it's at Ritholtz. Let's do it.
You asked me if there's anything I want to talk about. I saw a spectacular show last night. I'm still taking
a live show, or you watched Succession?
Yes, live show.
Where?
Kurt Elling and Charlie Hunter at the Tiller Center. Kurt Elling could be the best jazz vocalist since Frank Sinatra, male vocalist. And Charlie Hunter's this great guitarist, and they had just a tight combo. Nate Smith is just this killer drummer, and I'm like, I forgot how fantastic live shows are. We saw a couple of shows over the summer, but they were bigger outdoor venues. This was like an indoor, small, little intimate.
Oh.
Everybody has to show proof of vaccination.
Masked?
It was great. Yeah, fully masked the whole time.
Felt safe?
Ball gag, everything.
You wore a full ball gag? That's Kurt Elling for you.
I mean, so not only am I vaccinated, I have my booster shot, so I feel like I'm, indestructible, at least for a couple of weeks. I felt safe. I went to dinner with 9 of my colleagues last Thursday. We went to a restaurant around the corner from the office, which turns out to be a Michigan star-rated restaurant. And they were really serious in the city about checking proof of vaccination. I went to see another jazz show about a month ago, September, John Pizzarelli, and I can't remember the woman's vocalist. But anyway, I thought they were a little too blasé about. I could have flashed them, my Uber app, and they would have waited for me. It was like that. It was very casual.
It's interesting you mention it, because on your blog, although you didn't write this, somebody else apparently posted on your blog. Bob Lefsetz wrote about COVID attendance in concerts. He wrote, the first sentence is, the old people aren't going, and yet there you are.
Well, I'm not old yet. I'll be old on Friday, but I'm not quite old.
Who are we talking about in this piece, and where's the age threshold for who's going to live shows, I guess?
So I think generally, it's funny. Over the summer, we went to 2 outdoor shows at the Jones Beach Theater. One was Hall & Oates. I had gotten tickets from my sister-in-law as a birthday present in 2019. It got postponed till 2020. It was 2020, and then it got canceled. I got them in 2019 for 2020, and then it was postponed till this summer. And I thought Hall & Oates was kind of a boomer group. I don't really know them that well. I mean, some of their hits. You've heard it on the radio. But I'm not a big fan. My wife and her sister were. So I got them tickets, and I miscalculated. I thought the average age would be 65. It was 45. It's just a totally different. However, a month later, we went to see James Taylor. That was a boomer crowd. I felt very safe there because the average age was thrice vaccinated. That was the average age at the show. Hall & Oates was like a little younger. Jazz group like Kurt Elling and Charlie Hunter, mix, older folk, younger folk, but they were really serious. They checked your pass, they checked your ID. And the guy behind me took his mask off, and within 8 seconds, the ushers were like, "Sir, we have to ask you to wear your mask properly and not on your chin." And he was fine the rest of the show. So, at a certain point, it's like, as the curve comes down, as the infection rate comes down, and you almost feel like it's goddamn a year and a half. Can't live in, I know how the folks in London during the Blitzkrieg felt. It's like, when do we get to relive our lives? And, for the most part, so New York City, very heavily vaccinated. They were ground zero when the first wave began, them and Washington on the West Coast. Nassau County voted slightly for Biden over Trump. And so Nassau County, where I live, you feel reasonably safe. Suffolk County is, a MAGA county. So you just go due east from Manhattan. And the further away you get from the population center, the redder it is and the less vaccinated it is. There's a correlation between the two.
What a sad thing. I mean,
it's sad. So
you could predict attitudes based on people's politics.
Oh, totally.
But
you totally can.
But this is so much different. You know what it's proof of?
It's proof that the Republican Party has just given up the ghost and they've gone full MAGA. And, there used to be a phrase, the loyal opposition. What do you call the disloyal opposition? The people who are rooting for America to fail because it helps their political fortunes.
I think it's proof.
Want a recession, want a collapse, want more of COVID, like Team COVID.
Yeah.
That is not what American politics is like. And it is ultimately what will end the American experiment. Hey, 200 and something years, it was a good run.
Not bad.
250, what was it, 1776? Here we are. A couple of more, we're not that far off from 250. That's a good run.
Show me who does democracy better for longer.
The Greeks.
Oh, fair enough. But the issue, I think what it shows at this point is that people on the right, for whatever reason.
And the French sort of predate us, don't they?
Okay, fair enough. Stop hammering me over the head with facts. I feel like it's just proof that they believe crazier shit. They'll believe anything. They're more likely to believe ridiculous things. It's been that way as long as I've been covering politics. It's been that way. When it comes starting with climate, start with climate. That was never that controversial. It's not tough to understand. But they didn't buy that. They don't buy COVID, even in the face of death everywhere they look. And I wanted to ask you what it's like when Colin Powell dies and his family puts out that he was vaccinated. He was 84. People don't have all the data. Come to find out he had blood cancer, multiple myeloma, killed my grandfather.
Which means that any opportunistic infection is going to be very dangerous for him. It's not COVID. So I used to hate when people say, these people didn't die from COVID. They died with COVID. What, an otherwise healthy 40-year-old? That's from COVID. You could legitimately say Colin Powell died with COVID. If it wasn't COVID, it would have been something else. That's a really unpleasant, nasty disease he had. And opportunistic infections take their hit. That's very different than the other 700,000 Americans who died. And I'm going to send you the chart. I've sent this a bajillion times. It's the excess death count from the CDC. I'll send you this link. And it's just bonkers. And not just 2020, but 2021. It's insane what this looks like. And anybody who doesn't get this is, it's just horrifying. I continue to be.
What is the chart? Excess deaths associated with COVID-19. This is in reference to.
The Center for Disease Control tracks those deaths. Here, I'll give you this chart. Hold on.
What does that mean, excess deaths?
These are deaths above what we normally should expect. And if you make that larger, the yellow line is about what the average number of weekly deaths are. We see a spike every year around Christmas, around New Year's, and then it subsumes, it drops, and then you sort of peak in the middle of the summer, and then it goes. I mean, it comes in waves, and then suddenly in the beginning of 2020, it just explodes, and then it comes down, and then explodes again towards the end of 2020 and into the beginning of 2021. And now we have one more wave, the one over the summer. So you could see there's like 3 or 4 very distinct waves. The first two, the beginning of 2020 and the beginning of end of 2020, beginning of 2021, that was the worst one. And this last one was modest, but so avoidable. It's very sad.
I see the counts of deaths from all causes of death, including COVID-19, are presented as some deaths are due to COVID-19 may be assigned to other causes of deaths. For example, if COVID-19 was not diagnosed or mentioned on the death certificate.
But basically what it says is, hey, over the past year, there's been 750,000 more deaths than we should have expected over that same time period. And coincidentally, just by the strangest coincidence, there was a deadly pandemic ripping through our system. But by the way, I have some friends and some really more acquaintances and colleagues who are right-leaning economists, and I've had to write these people off. It's like, well, there's no proof that this is all that deadly. Well, how do you explain these excess deaths? You're defending an ideology by ignoring facts. You are not supposed to have an ideology. You're supposed to have a fact-based approach to solve a problem, figure something out, and then you make a decision based on what you've learned. You're doing it backwards. You're doing it from a religious perspective. It's also, partisan affiliation isn't a religion, although apparently in some people it's a suicide cult.
So, well said, but I mean, there's a lot more data points than these chart excess deaths. I mean, if you know,
this is just one.
If you know anybody who has had COVID, and you do,
yeah, of course,
it's fucking awful. It's really, really awful for so many different reasons. And someone might say, well, it's just an awful illness. No, you can understand how it kills people because they don't have enough oxygen. And the statistic to me that stands out is that the hospitals were overflowing with COVID patients, which means they're really sick people. And then they even deny that. Well, show me the hospital rooms.
Yeah, do you remember those assholes early on that said, where are the patients? Where are the patients?
In this debate with a very popular right-wing asshole who I used to work with, Dave Rubin. He was just on like a local California. He was debating Gloria Allred, making that point. Show me the hospitals that are overrun.
So that's what I mean by disloyal opposition. These are no longer people that are interested in having a debate. They no longer believe in the fundamental tenets of American democracy. They don't care about truth. They don't care about a debate of an ideas in the marketplace. They might as well be making movies with Leni Reichstag or whatever her name was from working with Goebbels and others. My dad used to say this to me. My dad used to say to me, don't think what happened in Nazi Germany can't happen here. And my answer was always, Dad, that's the Germans. We can't. It's not going to be like that.
Right. Yeah, no.
And then you find out that some 25-30% of the country are willing to follow a strong man, and not an especially good one, over the cliff. Like, if we throw away American values of freedom and democracy, rule of law and decency, and just like we want it our way. Hey, things have been pretty crappy for us, so throw it all away.
Yeah.
And that's why I said, 250 years, pretty good run. We had a good run. But
destroy the administrative state.
Right.
Well, what's it called, though, when I was trying to, I'm sure there's a name for this, but so Colin Powell dies and a whole bunch of people start, or any person that has been vaccinated dies or gets ill, and folks point to it as saying the vaccine isn't effective, it doesn't work, when of course...
Anecdotes. That's called anecdotal evidence.
It's called anecdotes, but when people point to the exception to the rule, when people point to the aberration, when people point to...
Because they don't understand probability. The probability is if you're unvaccinated, you're 6.5 times more likely to be hospitalized, and 11.5 more times likely to be killed by COVID.
Right.
Now, those are the numbers. That doesn't say that everybody who dies isn't vaccinated and everybody who's unvaccinated is going to die from COVID. That says, do you want to put the probabilities in your favor? Or do you want to, take out one bullet from a revolver and spin the wheel and put it to your head?
Right.
That's what it is. It's the odds against getting sick, first of all, if you're vaccinated, you're less likely to catch COVID. But you can, it's not 100%, you can catch COVID. If you catch COVID, you're much less likely to get very sick. But you can get very sick. And if you get very sick, you're much less likely to require hospitalization, intubation, etc. Although a tiny percentage of people had that happen. And then you end up with the cases like Colin Powell. So,
but Colin Powell had multiple myeloma.
Right. Colin Powell is the exception that proves the rule. Hey, you could be vaccinated and die, but look at that example. A very vicious blood cancer that destroys the immune system. Those people are at the greatest risk. And the Colin Powells of the world are why all the rest of these morons should be vaccinated. The unvaccinated are killing the Colin Powells of the world because first, their bodies are factories for mutations. And second, they're helping to spread the disease. So Colin Powell is a reminder that 18% of America are yawning hemorrhoids. They're just the worst sort of selfish people. Yeah. They're ignorant and they're aggressive about their ignorance. And unfortunately, the damage they do falls on innocent third parties. P.S. I think, did we talk about the neonatal nurse who was unvaccinated? She's working with preemie babies. I thought we talked about this. I don't
think so.
So someone who works with my sister, somebody who is friends with my sister, their relation is a neonatal nurse who's unvaccinated, and she works with like the most vulnerable human beings in the world, not just newborn babies, premature babies. And when the hospital found out she was unvaccinated, they said, you're suspended effective immediately. Don't come back until you get a vaccine. And P.S., if it takes more than 2 weeks, you're fired. And she was all up in arms about it. And I said, tell me where this person lives so I could just go slap her upside her head and say, how dare you murder infants because you're an ignorant schmuck? I mean, it's just, I don't want to get crazy or rant or anything, but dear Lord, can you really be that goddamn stupid? And this isn't like 10 steps removed. My sister knows this person and we discussed it. And I'm like, I wouldn't want anything to do with this person.
Yeah,
I'm
saying I feel exactly the same way. Minus the physical violence against the woman. I'd go tell me where she lives, and I'll bring the vaccine to her, because that's the other thing about this. Is it's a huge problem with a miracle solution. It's so easy to apply. We'll bring it to your house. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, though, is similarly frustrated, and I'm sure you'll be similarly as animated about it, which is raising the debt ceiling. This one, however, is even more insidious, it would seem, because there can be no question about it, because when the Republican was in charge, the Republicans did it, and when the Democrats, Obama, and now Biden are in charge, the Republicans won't do it, even though they themselves are responsible for most of the debt anyway.
Yeah, it's just partisan tribal nonsense. I've written about this. The deficit is just a cudgel. It's it's the sort of thing that the deficit hawks. I'm like exhausted even thinking about it. It's so much nonsense. It's been written about so much. I've written about it so much. Listen. We want child care. We want to extend health care to hearing aids and glasses. There's no money for that. Wait, but there's money there's $5 trillion for a war of choice with Iraq. There's always money for tax cuts. How come you could afford tax cuts, unfunded tax cuts? Yeah. It's just a nonsense. It's a hypocritical nonsense. And there is a little bit of a false equivalency, because the Democrats have dabbled in this space, but they're not really as terrible as Republicans are about this. If you think about it,
they would never tank the economy.
If you think about it, Congress says to the president, here, we've passed these bills, go spend this money, but only up to this much. Well, but you told me to spend this much, and now you give me another bill to spend. Which is it? You gotta be consistent. And so it's just annoying stupidity. And again, this comes back to the disloyal opposition. It's not a matter of we both want what's best for America and we disagree about how to go about it. It's now become, I don't know if I ever told the story to you. So we host these regular salon dinners. We were doing it pre-COVID once a month or every 6 weeks or so. And it's always filled with interesting people, some Nobel laureates, some economists, some market people, some academics. And one of the people who showed up and was describing some of the political situation. This is like years ago during Barack Obama. And the Mitch McConnell, my job is to make sure that he's a one-term president. That's my number one priority.
Note everything.
So I raised the question, and I wasn't being controversial. I was being sincere. When did it become okay for one party to root for a recession as a political opportunism? And everybody was like, whoa, let's slow it down here. They have political differences. I'm like, no, they're rooting for a recession. In fact, they won't give him any fiscal stimulus because now they gave him some stimulus to temporarily extend tax credits and tax cuts and to temporarily extend unemployment insurance, but they gave him very, very little. Like literally, it was a tenth of what we passed in the CARES Act. That's how little they gave him for fiscal stimulus. Listen, this is a problem that's been solved. We understand how recessions work and financial crises work. There's a collapse in demand, and you have two choices. You can either wait, and in a couple of years, the demands will come back. Meanwhile, lots of people are unemployed, and there's a lot of misery and a lot of suffering. Or you could do what we did every other time there's been a financial crisis and crash, and the government steps in to substitute their spending for household spending and their spending for business spending. And eventually, you prime the pump, and the economy starts moving again, and things go back to normal, much more quickly, much less painful. Oh, and then you have a deficit from that. But so what? Because if you don't do it, you have an even bigger deficit.
Right.
And so they know how that worked. There's no doubt in my mind that when McConnell said that in 2009, his political motivation was, let's tank the economy, prevent Obama from getting credit for the recovery that's sure to follow the market crash, and we'll blame him for a weak recovery. I mean, that was what was done. And people are like, dude, that's who would do that? That's like not responding to a pandemic and letting people die because you're incompetent. I mean, no one would ever do that. And lo and behold.
We've seen the worst type of horrible, unprincipled, selfish, dishonest behavior over and over in so many ways.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what makes me sad.
Finance, politics, the Supreme Court, the whole Merrick Garland thing. I mean, it's just
I'll tell you what makes me really sad.
Corruption.
I gave people the benefit of the doubt in 2016 when they voted for Trump. I said, you don't know him the way New Yorkers do. He's been a grifter from day one. We know, he's not the guy you see on the television show that's edited and polished. He's had a series of failures that he's somehow recovered from time after time. He's not a good businessman. He's street smart. He's clever, but, he's not competent. And other than taking care of his own ass, everybody else, though, that's dependent on him, it's a disaster. And so in 2016, I gave people the benefit of the doubt. Even in 2020, I said, I don't see how anyone could vote for this guy. He's been a debacle. And I understand that certain people will only vote Democrats and certain people will only vote Republicans. But you really have to recognize how he just shit the bed. I mean, there's nothing else left to say. And even then, I was like, I understand there's certain economic issues and certain ideological issues that you support. But once you found out that he was trying to steal the election, overthrow democracy, become an autocrat, finally, I was way too generous. Yeah. Finally, it's like, if you go to a Trump rally, you're an un-American traitor. I don't know how else to say it. The guy, other than the fact that they're so propagandized by Fox News that they, despite him losing 62 cases, many of whom in front of judges he's appointed, they still believe the Steele stuff. And it just goes to show you it can happen here.
Well, and if you're reading Timothy Snyder or my friend Kenneth C. Davis or Ruth Ben-Ghiat or anybody who is Jason Stanley, an expert, Jared Yates Sexton, talking about history. I mean, it is all so similar. Your dad was right. It's all so similar. And it's just about winning. It's just about winning. It doesn't matter how you win. There are certain people that just cheat to win, and that's the only thing that matters.
It's so disappointing.
So this is where we're at, and I wanted to ask you what you thought about, if you've been paying attention. We always talk about, housing and car markets, automobile markets and manufacturing, but lately there's been some pretty good, it's a little late, and maybe so is the government's reaction to it, I don't know, coverage of the supply chain. A lot of supply chain segments, Ritholtz. How closely are you paying attention to this as, just from an investment standpoint, much less an economic standpoint?
We've been talking about this for months now. It's pretty obvious that the vast majority of what we're seeing in terms of price increases are supply chain related. Semiconductors and problems with automobiles and putting semiconductors in automobiles last month accounted for the biggest chunk, like 3/4 of inflation. And back out supply chain issues, it's pretty clear all of this is a reopening problem. That to me makes the most
COVID problem as it relates to reopening from COVID.
Yeah. And there are certain people who I don't understand why anyone pays attention to Larry Summers. The guy's track record is just for shit. I mean, it's terrible. Forget the fact that I think he's intellectually dishonest. Hold that aside, because I don't want to be accused of going ad hominem. His track record as a Treasury Secretary, as the president of Harvard, as an economist, and as a policy advisor is awful. Everything he's touched turns to shit. I mean, I don't know how else to say that. So he was Treasury Secretary when the Commodity Futures Modernization Act was passed. You don't get the financial crisis without that going through. And who do you blame? Well, Larry Summers was there. Rubin also was there as well, before him. A lot of the repeal of Glass-Steagall, he was on the wrong side of that. He oversaw, the demolishment of the Harvard endowment. It was once the top performing endowment. No one really cares about their $40 billion. But hey, he was there. He screwed that up. He's just, I don't understand why everybody in the economics profession is so enamored of the guy. Objectively speaking, his track record is terrible. And so I think he's a guy coming out. He was there with Obama and argued for too small of a fiscal stimulus.
What's he saying now? Why do you bring him up?
So he's been talking against the Biden stimulus. He's been giving fodder to those deficit hawks, faux hawks, chicken hawks that you mentioned, as well as people like Joe Manchin, who we now know really was just against anything opposed to coal because he's from West Virginia. So I don't understand why the Democrats have no sense of urgency. They're one senatorial heart attack away from losing the majority.
Well,
we saw this already take place with Kennedy under Obama. It's like, what are you guys waiting for?
I understand that complaint, but I also don't understand what you expect them to do differently.
Get it done. Just get it. I don't know. Yeah. Get it done. Go crack some heads. Get it done.
That's not a thing.
Yeah, that's a thing. Get it done. Get it done. Done. Why are we still talking about this? Why aren't you there getting it done? Go get it done. Stop.
Me?
You're the president of the United States. Flex some muscle. Get it done.
What muscle does he have to flex?
Joe, listen, here's the deal. I need you to sign off on this. If not, I'm going to make sure that West Virginia never gets a penny for the rest of eternity.
They can't
Fuck
do that.
You, sign this. It doesn't have to be $3 trillion.
They don't have the power to do what you just said.
Oh, all right.
If they did, I would fully support it. I would also...
Yeah. I kind of get the sense that Johnson did that. When Johnson called you into his office, you left with soiled undergarments and you got it done.
That historical... I keep hearing it. It's not...
Because it's true.
It was a different time, and they had different cudgels, they had different leverage.
Trump was. I don't like what Trump did to the Fed.
Joe Manchin, you said a heart attack away from a minority.
We're one Democratic
but if Joe
aneurysm away from no longer being a majority. The Democrats are one aneurysm, one heart attack, one slip and fall, and it's over.
But Joe
we
Manchin
are
is
going to
the
be
only
a year into this presidency soon, and they're going to lose at least one branch of Congress next year, unless something really interesting happens. So there's no sense of urgency. All of this shit should have been done months ago. Should have been done in the spring. And you're losing momentum. There was a ton of Joe-mentum in February, March, April. I don't know. Where is the investigation into the president trying to overthrow the country?
Now, that's a whole separate subject that which we
all of this stuff should have been just 6 months ago. We are by April, the shit should have been done.
I mean, if we've had a pandemic that also took up a lot of time.
They rolled out, that's fair. They rolled out the vaccine.
And
they did a lot of stuff with that.
I think they played that pretty right in terms of waiting
and
on the
they had momentum, and they should have used it. And by April, May, they should have said, I came into office and I told you I would take care of it, and I took care of it. So I'm going to now hand this off to somebody else, and you guys are going to take care of getting the vaccinations finished by September 1st or October 1st. And now we're going to do voting rights. And now we're going to do infrastructure. And now we're going to do the reconciliation, and just fucking go. The Republicans, they would have had it done already. They would have had it done if the shoe was on the other foot.
Not fair. I just don't think it's fair. But I do want to ask.
Unfair or not, when that aneurysm hits, when that slip and fall hits, you'll remember this conversation. And I said, where is the sense of urgency?
I understand. I completely agree with your feeling around it. But comparing Republicans to Democrats, for one, can't be done. I mean, they can't.
What would Republicans do? Ask yourself that. The WWJD, what would Republicans do? And Republicans would have had this shit done.
It's a different set of tools. It's a different set of leverage. One great thing you'd be able to do is primary or threaten to primary someone. It's not the case in West Virginia. You're not going to find another person.
I'll give you that. You're okay with that.
Get back to the supply chain. And you mentioned, obviously COVID and starting back up. But there are other causes, and one of which I've heard has to do with tariffs. And I tend to wonder, talking about the trade war with China that Trump started, that wasn't really going to have the most impact for a while, right? These economic decisions and policies, often they take a little while for the full impact to be met. And I wonder if that's at play or anything else outside of COVID. I mean, you can't separate it, I guess. COVID is the thing. Starting back up is the thing. That's why you got 40, I don't know how many thousands or hundreds of shipping containers off the LA coast.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm down with that.
You don't have anything to add to that?
No. I think that there's essentially, I know these things aren't simple. I know these things aren't easy. I know there's a lot of moving parts, but at a certain point, you got to press your advantage, and you got to say, if we don't get, and by the way, once you give a deadline and you let it slide, that's it. You screwed. There's your line in the sand. I think there's a real potential for there to be a missed opportunity. Now, I'm still hopeful that the infrastructure bill goes through and that the reconciliation takes place and some form of even the way they're discussing this, $3.5 trillion, it's $350 billion a year. It's a 10-year thing. Why are we talking about $3.5 trillion? It's $350. And here's what it's going for. Jesus, we have $2 trillion for a war in Iraq and then another $3 trillion after it. But you don't have $350 billion a year to feed kids? Come on. To make sure the elderly have glasses and hearing aids.
And it's better economics, too. I mean, spending money here versus spending.
And, I don't know. Maybe Johnson's the wrong way to describe it. There's a reason why I don't go into politics, because I don't have patience for this bullshit.
I understand that sentiment completely. I just also want to make sure we're being realistic with what our expectations in terms of, what your choices are to solve a problem are. I'm not sure if there was something.
Break some heads. That's my choice.
What's this?
Here, vote this way. No? I've been watching the Squid Game. I'm going to put Joe Manchin on the glass
I didn't watch it.
Bridge. And basically, vote for this or step on the glass and see if it holds you.
It's wild to watch the Kristen Sinemas and Joe Manchin meet with lobbyists and do the bidding of the special interests over this bill. It's just so obvious what's happening on things like pharmaceuticals, and obviously you mentioned fossil fuels with Joe Manchin.
Yeah, so I don't know what to say. I'm not a Republican because I don't share their beliefs, and I'm not a Democrat because I don't share their lack of urgency and incompetence in these things. I can't do it myself. I have no patience for this sort of stuff. But dear Lord, just get something done. Jesus Christ.
Let me also ask you about that. I thought this was interesting at the big picture, the market share of entertainment subscription services like Netflix and Hulu and Disney,
that's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Why are you posting about this? Why is this important and interesting?
So first, Netflix is equal to everybody else combined. Netflix is over 50%. Amazon Prime, Hulu, Disney Plus, Apple TV, HBO Max, Paramount Plus, all the other ones, they're not equal to Netflix. But the interesting thing is that Netflix began owning the space. They were almost 100%. And it just kind of, man, this is some crazy pivot, right? Just like, put this in the beginning so people know where. So Netflix began as DVD by mail, and then they eventually started doing streaming. And I included not only the chart of Netflix versus everybody else, but a chart of these are the 10 biggest companies in the S&P 500 from 1980 to 2020, every 5 years. And what's amazing is that's not that long a period of time, but how it changed. In the first year, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 5 oil companies out of 10. By the time you get to 2010, there's 1, 2 oil companies. By the time you get to 2020, there's no oil companies. It just goes to show you how rapidly the world changes by just looking at the top 10 largest companies. Now, 6 of the 10 are technology: Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, NVIDIA, and you could argue Visa is essentially a financial tech company. So everything changes. Blockbuster is gone. RCA, Lucent, Woolworth, Sears, U.S. Steel, Eastman Kodak, Circuit City. Success is very rare, and the world changes, and I find that to be kind of a fascinating thing.
What do you make of of the job market? You get a great chart on the big picture. Americans are quitting their jobs at the highest rates on record, and there's been a lot of fascinating journalism, long form, kind of it seems anecdotal, but still interesting pieces about people having certain realizations through COVID, making changes in their life, saying, I don't want to work this way. I don't want to do that. And maybe they've discovered, ways to become self-employed in the hustle game, gig economy of some sort. But nonetheless, what do you make of this? It's a really interesting trend.
So, and in that post, so that one you're referring to was just something that came with today's reads. But I've been writing about this for a while, and let's see if I can scroll back to that. The thing that is kind of interesting is that this has been taking place over the past couple of years. It's so on October 8th, I wrote something called Radically Changing Labor Markets. Here, I'll share this with you while we're chatting. And what's kind of interesting is not just why the fact that it's changing, but why. And there's a number of different bullet points I referenced, but at the end I put a list of stuff that were links to previous stories. And back in April, I wrote the balance of powers is shifting in the labor market for the first time in 30 years. Labor has the upper hand, and the pushback from that. What's that?
It's Striketober.
Well, in April, that was like way ahead of the curve, and people thought I was sort of, what are you talking about? And then, 3 months later, it's a New York Times story. Finding it hard to hire? Try raising your wages. That was May 6th. And finally in July, I said, Elvis, your waiter, has left the building. because there's that great audio clip of, the audience going wild in an Elvis concert before I was born. And over the loudspeaker, the guy comes out and says, "Elvis has left the building." And that just became this wonderful cliche over the decades. And if you take a bunch of people and give them enough money so that they don't have to work and they can stay at home, they're not just watching Netflix all day. They're all online. They're getting degrees. They're upskilling. And a lot of the people who, I spoke to a couple of restaurant owners, and a couple of people said, "Hey, I can't find people. Guys aren't returning my call." I said to some of these folks, those waiters and busboys and dishwashers, they haven't left their job with you to go to another restaurant. They've left the industry. They figure eventually all this stuff is going to be automated. It's not a career, it's a job. And the ones who are smart enough to say, "Wait, you're going to pay me to sit at home and go to school?" Okay. They've gotten upskilled and they've moved on. And this isn't just anecdote. You have three factors that I'm hard-pressed. And I said this months ago. I'm hard-pressed to draw a different conclusion. Number one, you have the highest number of people voluntarily quitting, the quits rate that we've ever seen. Number two, you have 10 million open jobs. And number three, the number of new business formations in 2020 and 21 are both at record highs. You don't have to be a genius to figure out, hey, people are opening their own businesses. Right. They're not going to work for your crappy job at your crappy salary. So some of the cooks, they're setting up catering places or what people have called ghost kitchens, where, a restaurant is really inefficient. You have a parking lot, you have a dining area, which you hope is going to be filled, but isn't. And then you have this big giant kitchen. Most of that is underutilized. But if you have 3 or 4 restaurants off that same kitchen, and 2 of those restaurants or 3 of those restaurants are delivery only, now you're really being efficient. And that's one of the things that those people have figured out, with which the legacy entrenched restaurant owners, just to give you one example, have not. Or the people who were working in hospitality. They're working in hotels and stuff. Hey, you know what? I would rather manage a couple of Airbnbs and be an owner and an investor than be, an assistant manager at a hotel. Multiply that by 2 million people, 2 million jobs, or 10 million people who've moved on, and you end up with all these unfilled jobs. Why would someone want to be a truck driver? Eventually, those are going to be self-driving truck drivers. Right. Why would a 20-year-old go into that business? They're not.
Yeah, there's a shortage of truck drivers right now. I keep hearing that.
And that's because you can't hire young people because they know, hey, maybe it's a 10-year job at most. I'm not going to tell you these trucks are self-driving in 5 years. Are you going to push back against me and say 10 years from now these trucks aren't making their own deliveries?
You think it's disrespectful or condescending to say young people aren't thinking, that don't have college degrees especially, aren't thinking about 10 years down the line? Because I think they are. I think a lot of people without college degrees are pretty smart and often, kind of fiscally responsible. They say, what could I do to support myself? Where will I be in 10 years? I know a lot of blue collar guys that, say, I'm going to do this for this many years. I get to retirement. They have it all gamed out.
Well, listen, if you're a cop or a fireman, you put your 20 years in and then you're on a half pension. And then you have some second side gig that becomes your job. Yeah. That's not what I'm talking about. So normally there's you could see the how many people at different age works for different positions. And there's a giant hole in the donut. You're not getting the 25, 30, 35-year-old drivers for these big rigs because they know that's a dead-end gig. That's not a profession or a career. And you're seeing that play out over and over again in a lot of different areas. And so if you have the ability, if the government's going to pay you to stay home for 18 months, if you have half a brain, you're going to say, I'm not just going to sit around on my ass. I'm going to figure out something to do, and I'm going to elevate my skill set. And either I'm going to open my own company or I'm going to work as a freelancer and not be subject to the challenges I was subject to previously.
The one thing that is hard to probably measure is someone in my situation where, for whatever reason, I lost my gig before the pandemic. But a lot of us, when you don't have a job and you can't go anywhere, especially if you're a live performer, we found ways to adapt. And in my case, I found all kinds of ways to adapt. I created this thing and I'm doing it and from home. But most importantly, the thing I learned is I don't want to commute. Like, I like working from home. A whole bunch of people found out how to work from home and make equal, maybe a little less, but they're saving more because they're not driving, or even more money from home. That's a pretty good gig for a lot of people, I think.
So let me put this into a little context. So there's not robust data, but we're starting to assemble it. So I think what a lot of people figured out. So this has always been my home office. Like, I used to work here in the morning and then jump on an 826, and I would be in the city, by 9:30 and do my day and split early, come back, leave about 4. There is a problem with the relentless sameness of being stuck at home. Plus, you can't go anywhere because of COVID and lockdown and blah, blah, blah. As things start to reopen, I think we're going to see some combination of a blended work from home plus go into the office. I will tell you that working from home makes you realize how incredibly inefficient commuting is. Like, there are people who commute 2 hours each way a day, 90 minutes each way a day. It's just a colossal waste of time. It very much correlates with their lack of happiness. And, suddenly it's like, I don't have to shave. I don't have to get dressed. I don't have to shower. The joke during the lockdown, my wife was, Saturday night, you shower whether you need one or not. I mean, it's true. So now we've kind of learned. We reopened our office. It was nice going in on Wednesday or Thursday last week. I had like 15 people in my office. Can't remember the last time I saw 15 people at once. So I was commuting 4 days a week and working from home on Friday because I could. Now I kind of get the sense that maybe I'm going to go in 2 days a week, 3 days a week.
Oh, really?
And you go in to collaborate, to do meetings, to see people face to face. But a lot of the work you do, you don't have to be in the office. It's not necessary. And there was a Washington Post story a couple of weeks ago. I put it in my daily links about companies having people come into the office to be on Zoom calls all day. Why do I have to commute into the office to be on Zoom calls all day? That's just like a real bad approach to managing your employees. I think what you really want to see is people being productive. Now, if you want to have creative meetings, if you want to have collaborative things, if you want to brainstorm, if you want to do all these different things that it's just not you in front of a computer, well, then you kind of need to all be in the office at the same time. But it's madness to think the old system, which was just a residual, it goes back to why are railroad tracks the width they are, because they match the ruts in the road from, and this could be an urban legend, but from the horse-drawn carriages where the wheels are on either side of the pickup bed of the carriage. And why are the wheels there? Well, that's essentially the width of a horse's ass. And that's how you end up with a legacy issue carrying forward. So why do we all live in bedroom communities or boroughs and commute into the city to work? Because cities have been centers of intellectual capital for millennia, and this is where a ton of creative work gets done. That's morphing as we've come to realize I don't need everybody there. Right. Here's a question. So we worked very successfully from home. Our whole office, we hired people, sight unseen, other than, Zoom or whatever. And it raises a really interesting question that's going to change the economic dynamics of expensive cities like San Francisco and New York. We hired an administrative assistant, and we generally pay very competitive salaries for your local area. But do I need to pay competitive salaries for a New Yorker if a person is never going to step into the New York office? Or can I go to Tennessee or North Carolina or Austin or Idaho and get just as quality a person, but for half the price? Right. So we used to see labor arbitrage from the U.S. to Asia to the low-cost providers. I think you're going to start to see that around the country soon. I don't know if you'll see that with lawyers and accountants and doctors or any person where you physically have to be there. But if you don't have to come into the office, I don't need to pay someone a big salary in Nassau County when I could get the same quality person somewhere else. So I'm just spitballing here. I don't know how that plays out over the next few years, but I think it's a dynamic that's going to have a very significant impact around the country.
What about, final question on this, and I guess I'll let you go, is
by the way, this is what we should be talking about and not me ranting about idiots not being vaccinated.
About your political analysis.
I'm just annoyed at those people because they're killing people and it's frustrating.
That's fine. So what about residential real estate, or rather commercial real estate? Because you have this really fancy office in a really fancy spot. And
that is not a fancy office. That was a very moderate priced office in a great spot that it was undervalued, and I thought we got a great deal.
In a great spot. It's a really nice office. I think it's fancy. I guess I haven't been to fancier places. But,
no mahogany, none of the crazy stuff.
The point is, why pay so much? And, so somebody asked me the other
we
day,
have a 10-year lease, and it's year 5, so we're stuck there for 5 years.
Right now, these skyscrapers in Manhattan, are they going to stay filled with commercial real estate tenants?
I suspect, and I've talked about this.
What's going to happen to cities?
So you have cities like New York and San Francisco.
Food in all of those empty offices? Just
in Detroit, yes, you can turn Detroit back. You can take Detroit and turn it back into a farm. But in places like New York and San Francisco, where there's a perennial shortage of housing, right, and not just affordable housing, but any housing, there's a shortage, which is what drives prices so crazy. And now we realize there's an excess of office, maybe even a 25% excess. Go back to New York City post 9/11. The whole, what used to be called the financial district, people no longer have to go to the stock exchange. It's now a television set. Essentially, the stock exchange is a server farm in New Jersey. It's no longer down on Wall Street. What happened post 9/11 is a lot of those office buildings converted to residential. And I suspect that we're on the leading edge of a massive office to residential conversion. I mean, the people who were behind Hudson Yards talk about terrible timing. Now that's mixed. That's a mix of stuff. That's offices and retail and apartments. But, probably half of those offices are going to end up as apartment buildings at some point in the future. And don't be surprised to see maybe a core midtown area from, 30-something, 40-something, up to 50-something is going to be offices. But everywhere else is going to end up becoming residential.
And we're talking about New York, but I mean, don't you think?
San Francisco, Chicago.
Yeah.
I mean, look around. Miami, all these places are going to end up with they all have a dearth of residential space and a surplus of office space. I think that solution kind of figures itself out.
Well, they say that it's hard to know what will happen with what's called the reconciliation bill, but most people aren't doubting, even though they're apparently linked, the infrastructure bill. And you and I have been talking about infrastructure investments, and no one's, I think, talked about that better than you, at least that I follow. You've been hammering that drum. So at least hopefully we'll get that done, huh? Even though we won't have a democracy or a planet.
I hope so. I whatchamacallit, I would like to drive on a road and not have my fillings knocked loose.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't it be? So here's the thing. There's some ungodly percentage of Americans that don't have a passport. The rest of the world, we don't, the whole American exceptionalism thing is such a faux pretentious thing. Other countries have come up with great solutions for problems that confront all of us. Some people make better highways than we do. Some people have a better mass transit system. Travel around the world and it's like, airports don't have to be shitholes. Airports can actually be fast, efficient, functional. That's amazing. Why don't we have more of those here? And the answer is we've been unwilling to spend the money on it for a variety of reasons, none of which withstand close scrutiny. And so I would like to see the United States have a competitive infrastructure, because you're kidding yourself if you don't think that having a crappy infrastructure puts the U.S. at a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis countries like China or even, Japan or Vietnam or Turkey or wherever else, or London or, in the UK or other places in Europe. It's a global marketplace, and we want to give our businesses and entrepreneurs every opportunity to compete in that global marketplace. And when other countries have better ports, better electrical, more reliable electrical grid, better internet, better broadbands, better airports so people can get in and out of the country, better shipping and a variety of ports, better rail systems to move stuff around the country, and on and on and on. Lead pipes that, pipes for water that don't give you brain damage. Like all these things that other countries have, why can't we have nice things also? We've proven ourselves as a nation to be resilient and entrepreneurial and hardworking and clever. If only the tribal partisans would get the fuck out of our way and let all of us do our jobs and really make the U.S. economy and make the U.S. System of doing business as competitive as it can be. We'll hire more people. We'll pay more people. We'll raise the quality of life here. Everybody wins except the tribal assholes who are so busy holding this up because they don't understand what it's like to be part of a broader community and a broader country, because it's country second, party first.
Yeah, well.
And that's a problem. That's where the phrase disloyal opposition comes from. Your obligation, the oath of office you take is to the U.S. Constitution. Maybe you should go read that document and figure out what your responsibilities are, not to your party leaders, but to your fellow citizens. And, now you got me back on that goddamn soapbox again, and I'm sorry.
No worries, buddy. I love hearing you talk about any of it. But now I had to edit out part of my conversation with Barry because I mentioned my new sponsor, and he started making fun of my new sponsor. So then we were dying laughing, though, saying all the worst things you can say about a company, just, to tank the whole thing. But I asked him if he'd seen the Chappelle special. I don't know how we got on it. We were talking for like 10 minutes. And so now we're back on the record talking about that. And I thought I'd leave that on today's conversation with Ritholtz.
By the way, I started watching that the other night, and I'm a giant fan of Chappelle. My wife is not. Yeah. And she was out, and I wasn't expecting her back. And it was like getting caught watching porn. She walks in and she goes, she just rolls her eyes. I'm like, I'll put something else on.
Did she know about the she doesn't like Chappelle?
Oh, no, this was like before the controversy came out. Although, to be fair, he's been beating that drum for forever.
Weird.
As a stand-up, you're trying to be funny. You're exploring new material, and you don't want to self-censor. And he's a guy who's really pushed the boundaries over the years.
Yeah.
I kind of think that can we let our stand-up comedians, be the ones who push the envelope a little bit? And there is an argument to be had that we're too quick to cancel people when we disagree with them. He said just before he was canceled.
Yeah. Well, being canceled is different things for different people. But Dave Chappelle's in no danger of being canceled, whatever that means. It's preposterous. So many people complain about being canceled, like on major platforms. You're like, what are you dumb?
Right.
You're on.
Why am I hearing you if you were canceled?
Yeah.
Now we haven't heard a whole lot from Louis, and Louis C.K.
He's doing fine. He's out touring. He's doing fine.
Is he? Because
it's going to be a while before some major TV company, if ever, produces something around him. But
that show was so good in the first couple of seasons of it.
No doubt about it. It was great, and it was also really progressive. I think
that's the crazy thing is, he's not although you don't know, one never knows what lives in other men's hearts.
I still will say, however, in his defense, like it's hard to talk about him and categorize him in the same category as
Roger Ailes or
I mean the guy. He did
Harvey Weinstein.
Yep, he didn't. it's just different. It's different. I mean, I'm not in any way sanctioning or condoning his behavior, and he should probably have done a lot more and could creatively do a lot more to be contrite, but he didn't want to. I don't think he still doesn't think it's worth all the trouble he went through. But I'd
still like to really know what the Woody Allen situation is.
Wouldn't everybody? Yeah, I trust Ronan Farrow. I'd go with him. He seems to have a pretty good track record.
There's a credible case to make that when someone's that young, in the midst of a horrific separation with the parents, it's hard to tell what's real. It's hard to tell what's a false memory. It's hard to tell. Not that I think anyone willfully did something. It's just a horrific situation with no winners. And there's a very plausible explanation on either side. And P.S., I've been unable to watch the documentary. It's just too difficult.
I'll say this: I don't know that much about the whole Woody Allen case. I just say when I think about this, I try to separate people,
the art
cases
from the artist,
and not the art from the artist. Like if someone's a predator and they preyed on a lot of people, Sandusky, Larry Nassar, R. Kelly, Bill Cosby. I mean,
a one-off is kind of rare. It's an odd man out.
No, but then you've got these kind of power plays like Louis C.K. and that was a few different women who accused him of doing something. Right. And plus, then Woody Allen was, I don't know. That story.
It's the story of
were there other women and then Harvey Weinstein was a serial predator. Right. So some of them are serial and they preyed upon multiple people using the same game and tricks.
Are you making the argument that you think Woody Allen is innocent because there's only one accuser? Is that your position, Pete?
Other than his wife and me, I don't know what else. Are there other accusations about him other than he married his kid?
I don't think so, but I haven't been following.
Other than marrying his adopted daughter,
it wasn't his adopted daughter. It was her adopted daughter.
Other than marrying his wife's adopted daughter,
were they married or were they just living together?
It doesn't matter to me.
This is. I have no expertise in this space. I just was busting your balls and so you don't get both us canceled.
Who wants to die on Woody Allen Hill?
Not me. Although there was a movie that came out recently that looked kind of interesting, and it's one of those things that I want to see our artists have the freedom to push boundaries to bring this back to Dave Chappelle.
Yeah, but listen,
not to be abusive to individual people, but to Barry, explore the limits. Right.
Can we push the boundaries, not to be too cliche to say speak truth to power, but let's continue as comedians, as artists, as human beings to, I also do like the phrase punch down. Like, let's not pick on people who have no power. Really? You're picking on trans people? What power do they have? To me, I'm not really interested or entertained or impressed with people who pick on smaller people, and Chappelle is picking on smaller people, and it's to me that kind of,
I could see that.
Like there's so many other people that and things that he could be talking about, speaking truth to power. I mean, that's what many other comedians have done. So
well, by the time you get to your 6th Netflix special, you're scraping the bottom of the content barrel.
Right. Well, yes and no. There's plenty of content for Dave Chappelle right now. If he wants to talk about something, he could talk about the death of democracy. He could talk about voting rights for black folks. That's
not his space.
And it would be amazing, and he'd be amazing at it.
I'm out of my depth here.
He could keep hammering white people. That was working pretty well, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
No?
No argument for me. I find him amusing, but I haven't seen the new special yet, other than the first 5 minutes when my wife walked in and caught me watching it.
That's funny.
Right.
All right. I'll let you go.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right, there he goes. Barry Ritholtz at Ritholtz on Twitter, and of course the Big Picture blog, Ritholtz Wealth, and his podcast, Masters in Business. The great Barry Ritholtz. Always great talking with him, and now it's time to talk to comedian, podcaster, lawyer, the great JL Cauvin joins me next for a wide-ranging conversation. And JL Cauvin is still cranking out hilarious videos each and every day. Check out his Twitter, his YouTube, and his website, as well as his podcast. But here's a recent take, his response, his Trump impression responding to the death of Colin Powell.
This morning is a Some might say a sad day. Some might say a very sad day. You might even say that. But we found out this morning, I turned on the TV and it said, "Sir, we have bad news. Colin Hanks has passed away from COVID." And I thought to myself, this is one of these sad things that you're not prepared for, okay? And I remember it was like yesterday when Colin Hanks was son of Tom Hanks. Not a lot of people know that. I know more people probably support Tom Hanks. I don't. Colin Hanks declared it White Boy Summer. Remember this? And the left, they didn't like that. They didn't like it at all, but we supported him very strongly. We had great White Boy Summer events at Mar-a-Lago.
All right, there's a lot more of that video, but there's also very funny. He does so many great impressions, including of Dave Chappelle and the great Mike Pence, a great impression of Mike Pence. And here is a video he put out celebrating Columbus Day. Trump is celebrating Columbus Day, and then he throws it to Pence, which I think is hilarious.
Christopher Columbus was so pro-Trump. But we're going to celebrate it. And Mike, you have something to say?
Thank you for standing up for Columbus Day, Mr. President. I, for one, love Columbus Day. Every Columbus Day I put on my Italian tank top and take a big bite of sweet Italian sausage, and I dare the left to try and knock it out of my mouth.
Ha! So good, JL Cauvin. You can see him this weekend in New Jersey, Morristown, New Jersey, October 21st. He and I will be together, sold-out shows on the 23rd in New York. Then he's going to be in Lee, Massachusetts, November 6th, Pittsburgh, December 9th, D.C., December 16th through 18th. Then he's going to L.A. next year, February 6th. He's got a whole bunch of dates, jlcauvin.com. And, of course, don't forget to listen to both of his podcasts, Righteous Prick and Making Podcasts Great Again, anywhere you get your podcasts. And, ladies and gentlemen, here he is right now, JL Cauvin.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Good to be seen and good to see you. I see you're already bundled up. You got your winter. You're either dealing with cold weather or you're an LA comic in 90-degree weather wearing a wool hat for no reason.
Well, as a bald, and when the head is freshly shaven, it gets a little cold. Even the smallest nip in the air, but I don't need to wear it. I took it off. Anyway, you're wearing a sleeveless or a tank top, it would seem.
I just got back from the gym. It's I got my 8 o'clock podcast. So I'm just, I'm getting after it these days. I'm 46 pounds down.
Wow.
Since June 25th.
Shit. Exercise is great, but I'm guessing it's mostly about what you're eating. Yes, no?
It's calorie counting and exercising in some capacity every day.
Great. Calorie counting, meaning just, as you say, just take it in less than...
using an app, and, it gives you credit for, depending on how much you exercise, you obviously get a little more, but 92% of the time I'm within and I'm working out hard. I'm back to this is what I was for... about 16 years of my life, from 16 to 32.
Wow.
And then I still got in the gym in my 30s, but it really slowed down in my late 30s. And then COVID, exercised in any capacity, twice a month. So I really, just sort of got back to basics. And I think I had a little bit of a foundation, at least, that I had built up. So it was now I feel like my body is starting, and I had some nerve damage, injury, in 2018. So I feel like I'm now just getting back to, there's enough muscle memory and enough of a foundation that once you get through a few hard months, now I feel like the progress is steady.
So do you think you'll just keep hammering and keep losing and you're feeling great because of the exercise makes you feel great and generally?
I can't imagine how horribly I'd feel if I wasn't exercising, because I don't feel great, but the exercise has to be at least helping. We don't want to do a control experiment, though. We already did that during COVID, where it's what if I am miserable and don't exercise? What will happen then? My goal is to get to. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get carried away describing your emotional state as good. My bad.
I want to get. My goal is to be in the 230s.
Okay.
So I'm 271 right now. But I'm not on any deadline for that. It's just I figure steady will work. But I think just counting calories and exercising a lot, it's coming off pretty faster than I expected.
I feel like you think you're so famous that people just know that you're also 6'7". Like saying I'm 271, I feel like you should always include, and I'm 6'7". Like most people listening probably know you're super tall, but still, maybe they just found this channel.
Right. Yeah. 6'7", 271. But like I said, goal is to be in the 230s. And then, I'm hoping to time that for sometime around late March when I get my refund check. Presumably there will be a refund check, and I'm going to, revamp the wardrobe, get rid of a lot of the double XLs that have been my life and get back to an XL tall.
Jesus, I hope
get some suits and whatnot.
I hope your weight loss and wardrobe purchases don't put a dent in your annual contribution to GiveWell.
Well, I already gave, I'm just going to say it, I already gave $1,000 to GiveWell earlier this year.
That's right.
And then we got to see how, how business is in December and who will get because I've already exceeded my charitable givings from last year.
Oh.
Even though I've made much less, I've made less money this year, but I just figured, let me get to at least that point.
Is that in relation to circumstances in Haiti affect your charitable giving? Like
I give monthly to Hope for Haiti, and I gave them some extra money around, the biblical issues that occurred in that country, the assassination and natural disaster 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
As I said, as I plan on saying, if I don't forget it during my recording, Haiti is like the New York Knicks of Black nations, like a very proud, important history. But it's time to update the resume. You can't keep leaning on 1804 or, in the case of the Knicks, 1973. It's time to add some more positives to the ledger. But
who is the equivalent in Haiti to the owner of the Knicks? I mean, it seems to be a problematic analogy.
No, of course, it's like many jokes, it fails to meet Supreme Court rigor.
Well,
it doesn't meet Eric Siegel's scrutiny.
I'm glad to hear about your weight loss. It's a great way to open. I haven't talked to you in a while about anything, and I do want to ask you, since we're starting to talk about jokes and examining jokes, you've got some recent videos of you do a great Chappelle impression, and you've done a lot of that.
Some people don't like it, but I don't think they get that I don't get his voice perfectly, but I feel like I do a good job of capturing the tone, the mannerisms, the spirit.
One of the main you definitely do. But one of the main reasons I definitely wanted to talk to you on the record here is to ask you for your nuanced and thoughtful analysis of his new special. I've been asked in different places. I'm sure you've been asked and given your opinion in different places. But I always love the way that you take apart comedy. Obviously, you're half black, you're half white. You think about these issues, you live these issues. You really have gotten deep inside Dave Chappelle to do the impression. I know you're a fan of his comedy. So what do you think of his latest special?
I thought it was, excluding 846, which was not a comedy special. I don't know. That was just Dave Chappelle speaking on George Floyd. That wasn't really any jokes or anything. So excluding that, because I don't consider it comedy, and I don't mean that as an insult. I think this was probably my least favorite Dave Chappelle special. And I'm just speaking comedy wise. Like, that's sort of been lost. I feel like we are now in this sort of culture, this new culture war, or this side culture war, that you're either with, let me just think this through for a second. Because what I think is comedians, and this is a path that I see too much of. It feels like there are good comedians working just regular comedy, doing their thing, but the headline grabbers or the opportunity grabbers seem to be on the extremes. You're either with the libertarian, you can't tell me what to say, even if nobody's really telling. In other words, like, we've gotten to this divide. And this is one of those places in comedy, unlike politics, where I really don't buy into the both sides. It's like 90% the GOP that has caused our problems and our issues, if not a higher percentage. But when it comes to comedy, it's the rare place where I do think there is a little bit of both sides-isms. And maybe that's because I find myself in the middle so often as I'm a left of center person. I'm a decent human being. I care about other people. I also want the freedom to not be as great and decent and caring a person when I get on stage if I'm telling funny things. And I find myself sometimes, in this weird where this, a great example, I feel like I'm sort of a good experiment on this last year. As I rose to some prominence with fair Trump bashing comedy, I'll simplify it that way. A lot of lefties came to me and were like, "Oh, you're brilliant." And then I would post a joke that was like not super nice. And I'd have all these same people going, "This is disgusting. You're disappointing me." And I'd go, "What? Posting a list of CNN personalities whose names sound like porn stars? Not the crazy, like not really that blue." Martin Savage, number one, by the way. And because he doesn't even spell it savage, it's Savidge. Yeah. So it's almost porn parody built in. Like you have to say it to hear it.
Yeah.
But on the flip side were a lot of the, "Hey, bro, why don't you do that?" And they would see me doing Trump impressions and assume I was a lefty snowflake who didn't have real comedy instincts or credentials. So I have been in this like exact space. Now, when I look at all that, I think to myself, Chappelle has chosen his side, and he was always going to favor to the, libertarian side, especially as a comedian. I feel like any real comedian will, as far as speech goes, want to tilt that way, depending on, I don't know how far you go, but you as a comedian, I would assume all comedians would be somewhere on the side of more speech, more freedom. Maybe only a little bit, maybe a lot, but I doubt you'd find a lot of comedians who would be like, "I think we have to rein it in," entirely. Anyway, my point is, I think Chappelle and what that divide has created is like loyalty around membership in those groups, as opposed to, "Oh, I love your comedy and I'm going to hold you to a high comedy standard." Now it's, "You're now with us, Dave Chappelle. So now we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt because like your comedy, but we're going to let you speak and share all sorts of non-jokes and truthful opinions because we've just we're bought in completely." Whereas I'm in the camp of, as long as Dave Chappelle is being funny, I'm okay with it. I may not agree with it, but there was so much in this special that I was just like, Dave, you're a great enough comedian to get on stage and be funny off the cuff. But I don't know if you're a profound enough thinker and a deep enough thinker and a well-researched enough person that you can expound for a half hour on all the nuances of society without jokes and have me go, great point. And I do have I'm sorry, if you want to jump in, but I do have an example when I saw Chappelle on Broadway in 2019, when he had that run on Broadway. And I went to see it, and I think it was very instructive. I wrote a blog about it that got some traction, but it was very instructive, I think, into where he was going. He spent a decent chunk. When I say decent, I mean like a 6 or 7 minute chunk. The whole show was pretty excellent, but he spent this 5 to 7 minute piece on how Comedy Central executives wouldn't let him say the F word. And they said, "Well, Dave, you're not gay." Like they gave him the reasoning, like, "You're not gay." Like, there's a great show on HBO Max that came from Comedy Central called The Other Two, which I think one of the co-creators is gay. And they go hard with the gay themes and the gay jokes and the gay language, because obviously they felt comfortable with that because that's somebody in that community. But Dave Chappelle said, his response on stage was, "But I'm not an N-word either," which is, of course, a mixed metaphor or mixed analogy, because the Comedy Central executives are clearly not saying, "Oh, your usage of the N-word is okay because you're an N-word." They were saying, obviously, you can say that because you're black. But he twisted it. He twisted it into, "Oh, I can't say the F word because I'm gay, but you think I'm an N-word?" Well, of course not. No, that's like simple. Right. That would fail an SAT analogy. That would be the first answer you cross off.
and it got this kind of analysis of that it was genius, but it wasn't.
Oh my God, the crowd. See, and that was the thing. The crowd didn't laugh. Like, I was sitting there. The crowd didn't laugh. There were many black men with the and a lot of bros, New York Post reading bros going, that's what I'm talking about. And it was like it's like he was sanctioning, hey, don't feel bad about using the F word. He didn't say that explicitly, but there was this, he was creating this hierarchy where like gay slurs aren't really as bad, or black slurs are being treated more casually than gay slurs. And it's like, yeah, but it's you using it. It's you. It's not a third party doing it. It's you, Dave. You're using the N word. And they're saying it's okay because you're black, which is a common accepted thing. And they don't want you using the F word because it's a hateful slur that if anybody has ownership of it, it would be the gay community. And in terms of being free to use it in more casual settings or in a joke, which is why I brought up that show, The Other Two, which is incredible. But that really began my sort of disappointment with him, because he was using his clout as a gifted comedian to sort of move into this space that he didn't seem intellectually hefty enough to handle, or he was being completely disingenuous and making a shit analogy because he just felt like getting away with it. And a lot of his audience was just like, and it was almost Republican politics-esque in terms of, well, I want to be able to say the F word, so I'm just going to accept your terrible logic because it reaches the conclusion I want. And from that point, it felt like, because I thought Age of Spin was his first special back when he like signed the Netflix deal. And this was the one I think he had done in Texas, or it was like paired up with one he did in Texas. Age of Spin, I thought was amazing. I mean, amazing. So this is only like 5 years ago. I thought that was his best special ever and one of the best specials I've ever seen. And there were some trans jokes in his specials like 4 or 5 years ago that I laughed at. I wouldn't say don't be offended. I wouldn't say to somebody, don't be offended. I'd be like, no, if you're offended, it's understandable. But I still think he's doing jokes and they were funny. And he has moved into this sort of culture warrior without jokes phase, which, part of me, and I laugh because I made fun of Nanette, Hannah Gadsby's special a few years ago, because I go, I don't know, this feels more like a few jokes and then a spoken word confessional. But yet Chappelle, oh no, he's genius. So if you hate on him for the same reason, you're just not getting that he's operating on some higher level. It's ridiculous.
That's a really interesting comparison, I guess.
And it's his worst. I do think it's his. And I mean, on a purely comedy level, if he had made 20 minutes of offensive but crafted jokes about the trans community or stories, I know, after a while it would feel just like, okay, lighten up, even though you're joking. But I might have viewed it a little differently while not excusing everything. I would have been like, yeah, but it was jokes. This was like, here's my, amateur Jordan Peterson lecture to go with 20 minutes of stand-up.
Yeah, I felt similarly in a lot of ways. I guess my main issue is why go after a group of people with no power? Like, who does that? I mean, you can, and comedians do, but like, it'd be like going after cerebral palsy. They don't have any power. Like, why are you doing that? I do subscribe to the idea of punching down. I think that's a fine way of putting it. That's one issue. And the other issue is that he doesn't seem to take into consideration when it comes to trans that black people can be trans. He talks about the advancements that the LGBT community has made, and I was jealous of that. And it's like, there's intersectionality. There's a lot of black queer people.
The punching down. Well, but his perspective, he has created a world where he isn't punching down because the gay community or the LGBTQ community actually has rapidly accumulated power. Like that's his rationale. So he's actually trying to defend why black people didn't get either as quick success as the LGBT or equal success, whichever he views. The way he talked about the LGBT, and I think I may have written this, but it does kind of have a whiff of the way other people might talk about Jewish people. Like there's some sort of like sect that like they're this small group. Yes, they're disadvantaged, but they're also accumulating power. And like I'm not accusing him of anything, but tonally it kind of sounded a little like that. And then his story at the end sounded like the "I have a black friend" tone.
Right, I agree.
So he was really like, if he sat and listened to himself, maybe he wouldn't. He might be so rich and surrounded by people that adore him that maybe you don't get through at this point. But if he went back and watched that set as a comedian, would he hear things differently? Even from an artistic point of view, would he make some different choices or approach it differently? I'd be curious. Now he's in a foxhole, a mental foxhole, because everybody, it's become its own little battle and lines have been drawn. But I don't know.
You didn't acknowledge, though, my point about you can be black and queer. Like, he acts like gay people have made progress with black people. What about black gay people? Like that, that's a huge issue, especially with black trans women.
Sure. Well, I thought the show Pose was terrible. So
I don't know what that you're referencing.
Oh, it's a landmark show about trans women of color in like the 80s and 90s.
Oh, never heard of it.
And that's the one place where I might come down with Chappelle and be like, yeah, that show didn't deserve any Emmy nominations. So, 1 point for Chappelle. Oh. But no, no, of course. He tried to, because for him, he has to create a scenario where and I've heard other people say this, where he has to sort of make it a black versus LGBTQ. Yeah. So if he acknowledges that, well, then he can't play that card. Yeah, and then he's going to start losing some of the people who, white and black, want to pile on against the LGBTQ special rights or special treatment or whatever, the same. I mean, it's a sort of stunning thing if you just look at the language and the tone. Like I said, Chappelle, if you make Chappelle a white guy and put him in the 1980s or the 50s, he might be talking about Jewish people and black people in terms of like, they I can't get anything done. They control everything. It was he's obviously not talking about those people, but it has an echo, I guess is the way I'd say. It has an echo of that.
Okay, let me ask you about two other big things I wanted to get your thoughts on. As always, COVID continues. The Delta variant is continuing to ravage, and some people say it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Numbers have been going down. Vaccinations are going up. Is there any part of this that you're paying attention to, that you're most outraged by, whether the media's coverage of it, mandates, working, not working, airlines, vaccinations, boosters, science? What are your thoughts on COVID? Are you still paying close attention? Are you still being vigilant?
No, I haven't been sleeping well, obviously, and it was because that's just par for the course. But I felt a cold coming on a couple of days ago, and I got really nervous because I'm still nervous about getting a breakthrough case, because I'm trying to live my life. When I go inside places, I wear a mask, but not for shows and stuff like that. And I just think, I see governors like Murphy. I have Murphy in Jersey, and I think I'm voting for him, but I do think he is waiting until after Election Day to drop the hammer with, like, he said he's interested in doing what New York City did, get reelected, and then he's going to go vaccine mandates for all indoor activities. I am all for that. I don't care. I genuinely don't give 1 ounce of shit for anybody who is like, shut up. We have, you can vote for Trump in 2024, but until then, fuck off. Like you control the discourse too much. You fuck up society too much. From climate change to COVID, you're fucking awful. Like the MAGA nation is a fucking historical stain. Like, and I don't want to sound like one of the, fucking Houthis or whoever the ones doing the massacre were in Rwanda, where they started talking about their enemies as like cockroaches. I don't want to get that worked up, but I'm in a way, I'm kind of like, no, but you guys are actively fucking up the world. Like in other words, just take climate change and COVID.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And your mission is to like stop that, because why? Because Al Gore's a loser and Fauci annoys you. Like, I don't understand. Like this,
because
I still think
you're not living.
I can't even, like, this is when I start to like blabber.
Let me help you because you're wrong. I think that's a little bit of an inaccurate analysis. It's more about being told what to do. Climate change was not that controversial until, remember, Newt Gingrich and Nancy Pelosi did an ad together, until the solution became penalties, taxes, changing your behavior. Then the reaction was swift. Same thing with COVID. Not so controversial until the government says, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. You can't do this. That is when the outrage begins, because people don't want to be told what to do. They're individuals. They're not, part of a collective or part of a community. And if I don't know you, if you're not part of my tribe, I don't care about you. And you certainly aren't going to tell me what to do. That's how I see it.
But I think, and the way I tweeted this a while
and my
back.
answer to that was, somebody has to tell you what to do. Because you're not figuring it out on your own. You're acting like a child.
Right. And I think freedom and liberty have become like the buzzwords of the insecure, like it's like this all-purpose shield for feeling small and insignificant. Because I, not to get into a religious debate, but I feel like one of the things I think about society is sometimes the lack of a religious foundation. And I'm not saying this in terms of like, we need prayer back in the schools. That's not what I mean. But I do question and wonder sometimes about a society that increasingly becomes more secular, but doesn't replace that community.
Yes, for sure. No, I fully agree with that, by the way.
Instagram and my personal liberty. How can you, like, the conservative church in this country, I can't speak for every steeple in America, but it is so. If Jesus showed up today, he'd be, instead of turning over the tables with like merchants in the church, in the temple, he'd be like burning churches to the ground. Like, you represent none of the good. You are you. How do you get to a place where protecting your health and the health of others doesn't jive with so-called Christians in this country? It's such a mockery. Whatever you believe, it is such a mockery of what Christianity is supposed to be, in theory at least. And it's disgusting. And I think we have, like I said, I think those are buzzwords of insecure people who don't really have a true faith in a higher power. They like to be a part of a group with good branding and a powerful lineage and history. And I'm a Christian. Like, it's more like, you might as well be saying like, I'm an Eagle Scout, or I'm a member of the Elks Club in town, or the Masons. Like, no, and I mean that. I say that as somebody who goes to church. There's no way that these millions of people who support Trump, who don't want to get vaccines, who place liberty and freedom in this sort of only in the selfish context, it's a joke. And I don't give a fuck. I hope your life is miserable, and it's only mentally miserable. That's the thing. Getting a vaccine is actually it's going to help your life, but mentally, you're going to feel like you just took a big L because you're no longer a proud individual who can make his own decisions. You've been bullied and dominated. And it's a very, I'm sure you could find a high percentage of like every negative thing that we have in America. You'll find racism and greed and homophobia in the same people who don't want to be told what to do, because it's like, it's their only way of feeling connected or powerful. Or strong, because they're not true believers in a higher power. They're not all the things they pretend to be. They're not. They're weak. They're scared, and they're willing to make others sick and hurt to have this mental feeling of independence and strength. And it's deadly. And fuck them.
COVID has taught us some positive lessons, I think, but putting those aside, it's mostly destroyed everything. It's destroyed your relationships with your family and your friends and people that you work with. But it's also destroyed the things that we often want to escape to. And I wanted to ask you specifically about how COVID has really maybe not destroyed, but certainly created a lot of controversy in sports, specifically professional sports. Isn't that interesting that college leagues and athletics have been a lot more in line with guidelines and regulations around COVID? I think that's fair to say. But you're a big sports fan, especially with the NBA, where it seems to be the most controversial. What are your thoughts on how the vaccine mandates have affected certain athletes, certain teams in the NBA or other leagues?
Well, I think you can look at like the WNBA had 99% vaccination rate and the NBA has like 92 or something. But I think even in that difference, you see that machismo, that need to feel powerful. That feels about right, like a 7% difference between people doing the exact same profession.
To draw attention, to yourself?
Or just to I want to eat. And it's crazy to think that you're a millionaire and famous and successful and women want to be with you and you're popular and and that you still can't just. It's a medical issue. You're an athlete. You probably take supplements that a trainer gives you and don't even ask what's in it. Half of these guys.
Probably. You definitely do treatments and medications and all the other. Yeah, for sure.
You don't go, what's this stim going to do? It'll make your knee feel better. Can I do it now? Yeah, absolutely. Go. I need to play. And I think, Kyrie Irving, who's become, he's the most, because he's the most talented, he's an elite player. So he's been outspoken and if he was a scrub, he wouldn't be getting this much attention. I think what he's doing is harmful. And I don't think he's as stupid as it seems, but I think he is placing the desire to seem like an independent thinker over actually thinking. It's something my uncle used to say about people. Obviously, there's the Oscar Wilde book, The Importance of Being Earnest. And my uncle would always say about certain politicians, the importance of looking earnest. And I think with Kyrie Irving, it's about, look at me, I'm an independent thinker. Yeah, but I don't know if you're doing a lot of thinking. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's stupid. These vaccines are like, and it's so funny. It's so funny that I will say this again, that Trump, it speaks so much for his base and the mentality that he didn't even own this because he knew having it as a wedge issue trumped him being able to tout. Can you, like, if Trump had just fucking cranking out vaccines and stole some of the thunder so that Biden couldn't come in and ramp up production and get like an early bump, and then shit started to hit the fan in other areas, Afghanistan, Joe Manchin, Trump could be like, the one good thing Joe Biden has, I gave to him. And that would be a legitimate political point, even if not wholly accurate. But he couldn't because he cared more about having the wedge issue than actually having a success. And that speaks so much to him and his base's mentality of like, I want conflict. A conflict is a bigger win for what I want than a win.
It makes me think of his infamous quote, "I alone can save you," who somebody else said that before him, some other authoritarian, maybe Mussolini. But he could have done so much. He could have led, and it could have been his war. Presidents need a war for political prudence and enthusiasm and momentum. That was a war. It is a war still. And he would have won had he led on COVID. For sure. COVID, a lot of serious political analysts, I think, say without COVID, he probably would have won.
Which is so sad when you just think about that. My brother, very smart very smart guy over at ProPublica.
Yeah.
He said, we were talking about this because his older son is pretty severely autistic. So they've been living a sort of very tough existence on many fronts throughout this period. And he just said, I said to him, I was like, how disappointing is it that like people just can't take the vaccine, like that we can't even get through this, an immediate threat to health. That's why I know climate change has no chance, because this was like somebody breaking into your house and holding a gun to your wife's head. Climate change is like flood insurance.
Yeah, no, I
like,
think
you could say, I don't need insurance, but with somebody holding a gun to your head, you'd think you'd be like, I need to take immediate action. But with COVID, we were like, there's enough of this country. It's a minority, but it's enough that we can't move forward as a nation. And because we are world leaders, we will impede progress for the world. And my brother said to me, he said, thank God we have parks and libraries, because if we didn't have those things yet, we'd never get those. And I joked with him. I said, yeah, parks, you'd have Republicans going, you know what, if you want a place to exercise and hang out, work harder, get a gym membership and get a backyard. That's what I did. Libraries, why should we be giving you free books? Earn some money. If learning's so important, go buy books. Okay, that's why we need to lower taxes, spread the wealth. Everybody, I want bookshelves in every home, but I don't want books on the government dime. You know, it's where we'd be if we didn't have those things from an earlier generation and tradition. We wouldn't even have those.
That's a great point. That's a really interesting point. So where do you think we're at now with the kind of, are you paying attention to the congressional negotiations at all?
I mean, I've only read a few articles in today's main section of the Times, but every day I try to read a couple of the articles, and Joe Manchin, is the best we can do out of West Virginia. But the sad thing is the real solution, and I forget who said this several months ago, the real solution is to get another fucking senator from somewhere else. Well, let Joe Manchin be a nay vote, but let him not be the deciding vote.
That's why they want to make D.C. and Puerto Rico state, but that's not happening at all anytime soon before the election. So, all right. Well, what was the last thing I wanted to ask you about the?
But Manchin really, I mean, I know we can't do better from West Virginia, and I've made that argument to people. He at least allows us to control the agenda before he says no to it. Obviously, if Mitch McConnell were in charge, it would be even worse. But Manchin really strikes me as a just sort of a scumbag, I think. And I know he has like a nice tone to his voice, and I'm sure he's like nice to his friends and family and neighbors. Like, you know what I mean? But this is disgusting.
That's why it's so hard. That's why it's so hard to talk poorly about a person who you know personally, and they're really kind to you and your family, but they're fucking up the entire system for corrupt reasons.
I only know him as a senator, so I can only judge his merits on the way he impacts the world in the biggest way. And you just read about him and you're like, oh, your state is actually there's like 14,000 coal miners and 100,000 home like healthcare workers. What's your real big industry in West Virginia? You're holding on. You're like playing this bullshit traditional thing in people's imaginations that you're still a coal mining state. No, for the wealthy, the people who own, like him, who own, who have positions in the coal industry, it's great for them, but it's not the main driver of the West Virginia economy. Like 10 times as many people are in healthcare in West Virginia. There's an article on the front of the Times that I did read about where Manchin's family lives, members of his family, they're getting flooded like crazy. They are feeling the impacts of climate change. And he is like, I kept wondering, though, I think the deal to make, if I can offer my suggestion, and I'm sure it wouldn't work, but is what if you take climate change off the table? And trust me, you know how I feel about it. But he kicked the filibuster for voting rights, because if you get that voting rights legislation passed, you now have a fighting chance to get you have a chance to make him obsolete in 2 to 6 years.
Oh, that's an interesting strategy. That is an interesting
strategy. In other words,
strategy.
you say, Joe, climate change, not part of the package. The package is now $1 trillion. It's lower than you wanted, but in exchange for that devil's bargain, you have to buck the filibuster for the voting rights legislation that you crafted, by the way. Because if he looks at that and says, look at me, I got them to lower it from 3 trillion to 1 trillion. My state's not going to have to do any climate change shit. And guess whose Voting Rights Act passed? Mine. So now the left thinks I'm a voting rights hero. The right thinks I'm a sensible fiscal conservative. West Virginia loves me for not giving them all that green energy nonsense. But 2 to 4 years from now, maybe the effects of that legislation actually preserve democracy, preserve democratic power. And all of a sudden, Manchin, you play a little bit of the long game with Manchin, but you can't play too long a game because the planet's burning. But if that's what it takes to get that, other than, because he's not going to give you the, what I mean, I think you get what I'm saying.
I know exactly
I think that would be an interesting strategy.
It's worth mentioning that this, and I share this with you, that climate is such a deeply important issue. You sent a lot of your own money donated to candidates that care about this. All right, lastly, what are your thoughts on speaking ill of a person shortly after they die? And of course, this is a conversation about Colin Powell, died yesterday, and a lot of people saying, the worst things that he did. And I don't know. I think it depends on who it is. But what are your thoughts on it generally? Do you have any principles on that?
Well, and I have principles on anything, but I think that maybe I'm a little more, I think you can't sort of, maybe you go case by case. Like, I don't have a hard and fast rule about don't speak ill of the dead. Like when Donald Rumsfeld died.
Yeah, well,
I saw people trashing him, and I felt like he had less of a positive public legacy than Colin Powell. Like Colin Powell was a respected, revered sort of person with bipartisan respect. And if you're asking me, I don't think he lied. I don't think he intentionally lied. The deaths are the deaths, but I don't think he would have put his reputation on the line knowing that he was like, and maybe he did knowingly lie, but I don't think he did. And I think there were many admirable qualities and a historic nature to his service. But he wants to bring up, that he talked the UN, went to the UN and made the case for weapons of mass destruction. But unlike other people in Bush's team, I think Colin Powell acknowledged at least that it was, Donald Rumsfeld had more of a shrug your shoulders, like a mulligan kind of attitude about it.
Colin Powell blamed the people who gave him the bad intel, which is not a great thing to do, to blame other people. He should have known better. And you know why? Because I knew better, because the weapons inspectors told everybody there are no weapons here. You didn't have to listen to the American authorities. The CIA wasn't selling it very hard, even themselves. I mean, if you, I don't know. I'm pretty. That's the issue of my time, that I think I'm the most kind of. I covered the most. Yeah. Someone said today, talked about his achievements as a black man, the first black man to do a lot of things. And I kind of want to be like, yeah, you know what? But do you care about all of the black and brown men that he sent to their deaths on a lie and knew better? And there were some other things that he did as well in his
And there
past.
were definitely strong men who were the first black men to lie in the UN. He was definitely not the first one to do that. I'm sure there were strong man leaders who lied to the UN. So he doesn't get to claim that historical first.
But it's just, I don't. When you think about a person's flaws, you might think, well, they weren't a good father, or all kinds of serious things. But sending an entire generation to war the way that he did, and really never maybe I missed it.
And it was his credibility helped sell that. Like,
of course, he was used, and so many other men and women that were in very high positions in corporate life and public life resigned. They resigned. out of, 2 people just resigned from Biden's, I think, like DHS over the treatment of those Haitians. People resign on principle all the time. This was a war. He could have, and his credibility would have mattered had he resigned. Say, I can't do this. I don't see and by the way, he knew what would happen. That's even worse. Even if they had weapons as mass destruction, he knew what would happen if he sent the American military in. Anybody in the Vietnam era knew, and he had the intel. He knew. They knew that it was a tribal country that would just spin off into 3 separate warring sectarian violence. He knew that. He knew it, and that's exactly what happened.
I'm a big fan of the Kurds, though. I think they came off pretty well in this.
Kurds always seem to come off very well, and we always abandoned them. We abandoned them for the 3rd time. Bush did it. And then I think we did it. I think Obama did it. Was Syria it? And then, of course, Trump did it.
Well, Trump.
Awful.
See ya. Good luck. Thanks for your help. Thanks for all your help.
Yeah.
Now fuck off.
We'll be right there.
Right, like January 6th. I will meet you down at the Capitol.
Yeah. Listen,
I know when we talk, I usually just get very pessimistic, not because I'm talking to you, but because of the issues we talk about. But, and you have 2 teenagers, or both teenagers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 14 is the younger. And it's just one of those things where I know you need to be positive, but I think it's a scary world that they're entering. An increasingly frightening world.
Yeah, I don't know what you want me to say to that.
Yeah,
I'm not going to say that that's not the case. I think that people with more means will continue to have more opportunity to survive, maybe even thrive, than people with less, although that's changing. I don't know what the girls will have. I don't know what the girls will have. I don't know where they'll...
My prediction is in 4 years, all 4 of you will be in the shed.
I think that that's a real possibility. and the weird thing is, I will be the only one who won't mind. I'm like, hey guys, this is awesome, isn't it? Guys, sleep up in the loft area.
Yeah, those books will be a bunk bed.
I take one day at a time. I think that's a great mantra. I do everything I can. I find my happiness, and I try to think as positively as I can. But it's challenging, and I'm not alone. I mean, I think that's a huge part of why people continue to listen and contribute to the show, because we're just trying to all take one day at a time and figure out what the hell is happening and what the best choices to make to live the best life that we can and set our kids up however we can. But it's terrifying. Terrifying. I mean, I think the hardest thing about that, honestly, is saying to my kids, and really it's mainly about climate, but I have never said anything to them, but I don't know if you should have kids. I mean, the climate situation could be tough for them, for their generation. And so, but I don't think that's my place either. I don't know. That's tough. I think it's tough for every parent right now, seeing their kids and seeing what they're going into. And I just am trying to keep them off the social media one day at a time.
But you like TikTok?
No, I don't. I mean, I think TikTok.
You're done with TikTok now?
I love all of it. Don't get me wrong, but I love sugar too. I love a lot of things that are unhealthy. Love them. I think all of those things, are the same to me. And yesterday, the best part of my day was planting flower bulbs. It was really wonderful. And I'm not even joking. It was wonderful. It was a beautiful day. I had a little fire going. It just that's where I try to stay off the screens as much as I can, but it's hard.
Indeed.com for all your job needs.
I'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, J.L. Cauvin, Barry Ritholtz, a lot of depressing things happened in these conversations, so hopefully that didn't affect you too much. Always find the light, the silver lining, the positive in between, if you can. I know I'm doing my best to do that, and I really appreciate all your help along the way. You guys are the best. This is an amazing community of people, and I love you so much. I will talk to you tomorrow. John Carroll, won't you please... take this one.
Drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in with other causes for laws. And since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was going to come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lie awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and hear